Thank you. Good morning, members. Good morning, members of the public. This is Babergh District Council Planning Committee's first Teams recording and visual effects. Hopefully it will all work well, but please do bear with us because obviously we're all in a learning curve on this. But I'm now going to go through some of the domestic arrangements that I have to go through, so please bear with me. May I first remind you of the domestic arrangements? Please ensure that the microphones and cameras are turned off when not in use. If you need to speak, you put your hand up and I will then call you into the meeting and you turn on the mic and you turn back on the camera. Okay, so that's how you'll get to me. I will say it and Rob, the officer concerned, will see that you've got your hands up, so between us we should not miss you. That you do not interrupt other speakers. That if you wish to speak, declare a point of order, declare an interest, request an adjournment, please use the hands up function on the task, which I've just explained. Members are reminded that they should not have alternative communication lines open other than Skype chat, and that if you are contacted by a third party during the application, you should bring this to the legal advisor's attention and mine. That if you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. If members do lose connection to the meeting, they must contact the member support officer, Mandy Smith. In this case, as soon as possible. You all have her number. I can't give that out over. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be recorded, except where there are confidential and exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the council possible to have been consented to being recorded. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the council and to the possible use of those sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The council, members of the public and press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and press are not lawfully excluded. I'd now like to introduce our officers. Stephen Stroud, if you just wave. Lovely. He's the Strategic Project and Delivery Manager. In old language, he's the Chief Planning Officer for today. Jack Wilkinson, Case Officer. I don't know if he's present, but anyway, you'll see him later. Bradley Heffer is the Case Officer for the second one. And Andy Prez, the planning lawyer, if you like to wave.
Morning, Chairman, I'm here, yeah.
Yeah, and Robert Carmichael, which is our right-hand governance officer. And you are, if you'd like to wave, Robert, so people
Morning,
can see
Chair.
who you are. Lovely, thank you. Right, I'd now like to move to the agenda, please. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I will ask the officer, Robert Carmichael, to do a roll call of members present, and please answer present or here.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick just correction, possibly from the opening part, is that it was with referral to other communication lines. It was i.e. other Skype chats. There shouldn't be any other open. Just to clarify that, Chair. I think there was a typo in your opening part. So I'll just run through. So first of all, just a note is that Councillor Trevor Cresswell is substituting for Councillor Alison Owen today, and we've received her apology. So Councillor Sue Ayres.
Present.
Councillor Melanie Barrett.
Present.
Councillor Peter Beale.
Present.
Councillor David Busby.
Present.
Councillor Trevor Cresswell.
Present.
Councillor John Hinton.
Councillor Hinton is has contacted me and sends apologies for the moment. He has a family health problem that's developing at home at this moment. He's hoping to get it solved quite quickly. If he joins the meeting while we're in the first application, he will not take part in it, but he hopes to definitely be here for the second part. I've told him I will take a comfort break at the end of the first application to be decided, and in that time the officers will try and make contact if he hasn't already joined us. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. That's noted. Councillor Lee Jameson.
Present.
Councillor Mary McLaren.
Present.
Councillor Adrian Osborne.
Present.
Councillor Lee Parker.
Present.
And Councillor Stephen Plum.
Present.
And finally, Chair is the ward member of Councillor Sue Ayres, Councillor Sue Carpendale, who said she will be joining us later for the application in her ward.
Thank you. Right, we'll move to item number 2, which is to receive declarations of interest or not. Do I have any? Are there any to declare?
Yes, Chair. I ought to report that I've had a couple of meetings with Mr. Harding in my role as Director of Babergh Growth. It bears no relevance on the Kersey application that we're seeing today.
Yeah. No, I would think that's so, but I'll ask the legal officer. Can you confirm, please, Ian?
Good morning. Yes, Chair. I heard that, and that's quite all right. It was sensible of Councillor Busby to mention that, but it's certainly not disqualifying interest.
No.
Just been noted as a.
Thank you. If there's no others, then we'll move on to item number 3, which is to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of June. Are there any points of accuracy that needs to be raised? First of all, you've all seen them. I'll take that no then. Can I have a proposer, please, and then a seconder? Members, proposed by Councillor Parker. Seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Barrett. Do either of you two wish to say anything? No? No. Right. All those in favour, because you've been through them, please show.
Oh, sorry, Chair.
Oh,
sorry,
no, you've got to roll.
I have to do a roll call vote for this as well, I'm afraid.
Just testing you, Rob. Okay.
So, sorry, Chair, I've just got to get the right thing back on my screen.
Yeah, I've got it on mine, but I missed it anyway.
Thank you, Chair. So if you could please respond with for, against or abstain. So, Councillor Sue Ayres.
For.
Councillor Melanie Barrett.
For.
Councillor Peter Beer.
For.
Councillor David Busby.
For.
Councillor Trevor Cresswell.
Abstain.
Councillor Councillor Hinton, we're aware, is not here at the moment. Councillor Lee Jameson.
For.
Councillor Mary McLaren.
For.
Councillor Adrian Osborne.
For.
Councillor Lee Parker.
For.
And Councillor Stephen Plum.
For.
Thank you, Chair. That's carried.
Thank you. Then we'll move on to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of June 2020. Are there any points of accuracy that needs to be raised? No. I see no hands up. Right. Then can I have a proposer and a seconder, please?
I'll propose.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. You proposed it. Do I have a seconder?
I seconded.
Thank you. Councillor Plum has seconded it. Right. There's no hands going up, so I assume that's okay. I'll now ask the officer to take a roll call again.
Thank you, Chair. So if you could please respond with for, against or abstain. Councillor Sue Ayres.
For.
Councillor Melanie Barrett.
For.
Councillor Peter Beer.
For.
Councillor David Busby.
For.
Councillor Trevor Cresswell.
Abstain.
Councillor Lee Jameson.
4.
Councillor Mary McLaren. Councillor McLaren.
Sorry, it was the mic. 4.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Adrian Osborne.
4.
Councillor Lee Parker.
Abstain.
And Councillor Stephen Plum.
4.
Thank you, Chair. That's carried.
Thank you very much for that. We'll now move to item number 5 to see if there's any petitions, notifications of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme. Officer Carmichael.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Item 6, site inspections. Officers, are there any site inspection requests?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members, are there any site inspection requests?
Are we doing site inspections?
Well, this is for a request. Whether we do them or not has to follow. No, I'll take that as no request. Thank you very much. Right, we then get to item number 7, which is the plan and applications for determination by the committee. Now, members, I have informed you that I've altered the procedure around, that we're going to take item B as the first one, which is land to the rear of 1 to 6th Street, Kersey. That's on page 49 of your papers. So we'll get that, 49, here we are. And the officer on this one is Stephen Stroud. So over to you, Stephen. Perhaps all others would now turn off their cameras and turn off their mics. Thank you.
Excuse me,
Yep.
It might be a point of order, I'm not sure.
Right.
Can we just understand why we're having to re-examine this same application that has been approved by a previous development committee?
Yes,
on what the reason is that we're actually, this is being brought forward again.
Yes, it was something I did voice at the briefing on Monday, but the officer and legal may want to come in on this. Stephen, oh, you're going to start, Ian. Okay.
Well, no, I was going to say, Chairman, I hear Mr. Stroud first, then I'll help out if you need me.
Thank you very much. Stephen Stroud.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Chair. I note the question. This is something that I've tried to set out, albeit in relatively brief detail, in the introduction of the committee report before you members, that following the resolution of the planning committee of, I think, November or December 27th.
Sorry, why can't I see?
Oh, sorry, Chair. Oh, that's my fault, Chair. I was doing that in preparation for getting the PowerPoint.
I think as we've got the technology and we can be seen, I think it's important people see you. Okay.
Yeah. So following the resolution of planning committee to resolve to grant permission subject to a section 106, we received a letter before claim under the pre-action protocol, which in the officer report is referred to as the PAP letter. So that is effectively a prelude to a challenge being made, a claim for judicial review. The allegations were that there were deficiencies in the officer report and the decision-taking process of members. Having taken legal advice, the view is that really this item ought to come back to committee for redetermination. Planning permission was never granted. I appreciate that quite a considerable amount of time has passed since that committee, and there have been various new documents provided by the applicant, which has in turn necessitated new consultation, which has in turn led to more comments of a legal nature. And obviously your attention is specifically directed to several of those letters provided by Richard Buxton solicitors that no doubt you will have considered prior to this morning. So on that basis, we're providing a new officer report for you to consider. You are expected to come to this with an open mind, relook at the application, consider very carefully the recommendation that's been made to you, which is one of refusal, bearing in mind the heritage harm that has been identified, and obviously I can touch on that a bit more as we go on, and no doubt provide further advice through the debate. But that is it in a nutshell. Is that helpful to Councillor Barrett?
Ian?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Stephen says, Chairman, and there's nothing I can usefully add. He said it all. Yeah.
Councillor Barrett, does that help you out at this time?
I guess what you're saying is that there were some flaws to the previous decision or to the planning report. Can you sort of help us there to understand that?
So that was the allegation, yes. And having taken legal advice, the prudent thing to do, members, is bring this back to you. And if you are minded to, having considered everything again, move to potentially grant planning permission contrary to the very strong recommendation that's been given to you, we need to be absolutely clear in terms of your decision-taking process in that respect. You have a new report. You're coming to this with an open mind, and it really is important that we effectively start again.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Barrett. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right.
Chair, just before we start, could I just I don't know if you were just about to go on to this point, but
yes, I was.
All right, I'll leave you to it then, Chair. Thank you.
Hopefully it's the same point you were going to go on to. Before we begin this item, can I please have it confirmed by Councillor Jameson that you will be remaining on the committee for this item? In other words, you're the ward local member, and you have a choice to either speak purely as the ward member, but then not take part in the debate, or remain as a member of the committee, whereas you can take part in the debate as normal. So, Councillor Jameson?
Yeah, I will confirm I'd like to stay on the committee and take part in the debate.
Thank you very much.
That's okay.
Hopefully that was it, Rob. Right. Now we'll ask the case officer, Stephen Stroh, to present the application, please. And will all members turn their cameras off and mute their mics? Thank you.
Okay. Just to confirm, can you see this? Is this working?
Yeah, I can see it, so I'm assuming other members can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Before I do start, I think just as a matter of housekeeping, it's important, obviously, to draw members' attention to the tabled papers, of which obviously there are a number of documents. I think just for sake of tidying things up, in the first bundle, things may appear slightly out of order, or it's important at least to understand what order they're supposed to be presented in. So the very first item you've got, which is appears to be an email from Patrick Taylor to the agent, Philip Branton. That document. The second, which is an extract of the listing descriptions for the host properties, obviously with emphasis placed in certain points. That is also from the applicant. As to is a letter which is addressed from Patrick Taylor to the Chief Planning Officer, Philip Isbell, explaining his position on matters, his qualifications and his reasoning. And they are to be read alongside the letter, which is later on in the bundle, from the applicant, Rural Community Housing. Once you've done that, the drawings, just a reminder of the elevations which are in there, along with the site plan, they accompany the letter from Richard Buxton's solicitors. At the end of that bundle, then, there is a response insofar as landscape matters are concerned from officers, just clarifying their reasoning and position on the application in those terms. There is then a second bundle, which is a number of documents of accounting information relating to the applicants, and an email from Richard Buxton's solicitors on behalf of a number of objectors, drawing attention to ownership matters relating to the applicant as pertaining to the site, Obviously, it's clear there for you to read in respect of that email. I understand that just prior to the meeting, Councillor McLaren had asked that we clarify whether A, officers were aware of this, and B, what bearing it might have upon this application. In respect to the former, officers were aware through previous correspondence received from objectors that there were concerns raised in respect of properties that the applicant might have in the immediate vicinity or in the village which are vacant. This is dealt with at paragraph 106 of the officer report. The weight to be given to any consideration is, of course, a matter for members' own judgment, but it is dealt with in the report there. I should imagine, though, for sake of prudence, it is something that you might want to raise with the applicant once they've had their 3 minutes to perhaps question them in terms of what the status is of any properties they might have locally and why perhaps they might be vacant. So I don't see any particular reason why members shouldn't ask that question. And then lastly, there is an update provided. I've been contacted by the strategic housing managers just to clarify the precise terms upon which, or at least the precise heads of terms upon which a Section 106 agreement would be agreed if members are minded to grant permission contrary to officer recommendation today. So that's the table papers obviously members will have had and will have considered and read. I'll now move on to the presentation proper. So this application relates to land to the rear of 1/6 Street, Kersey. The description of development is that it is for the erection of 7 number 2-storey dwellings that I'll take you through the drawings shortly. This is an aerial map just for you to get your bearings, members. So if you follow the red star here, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but
yes.
got the red, thank you. There's a red star in the centre here. That is effectively Kersey Village. Obviously across to the west, you've got Lindsay and the Tye. Southeast, you've got Hadley, and obviously then this is the street and Churchill of Kersey here, and Kersey Mill, of course, to the east. Just in terms of wider context in landscape terms, given that this has been raised as an issue that members do need to give careful consideration to, this relates to the landscape character types that apply to the village and its surrounding area. We're sort of in this location here. Rightly, the letter that you will have received on Friday on behalf of objectors points out that obviously in landscape terms, the parish and the village in a wider sense do sit within 2 landscape character types, being the ancient rolling farmlands and rolling valley farmlands. That's obviously all set out in detail in the table papers in respect of the officer response, and indeed the letter from Richard Buxton solicitors. At a slightly more micro level, or at least zoomed in detail, you can see that the village itself actually sits truly within the rolling valley farmlands, and certainly the application site does, landscape character type, which is this yellowed area. And obviously you can follow this finger as it comes across the village, following a tributary of the River Brett, and terminating sort of between Groton and Lindsay. Obviously the application site as well falls within a special landscape area, which indeed washes over the entirety of the village, and quite a greater area still. It is this lighter yellow coloured area you can see here, which runs effectively from Lavenham all the way round and down, following the route of the River Brett, down to the bottom here where you can see Upper Layham. So onto the site location plan. Obviously we're outlined in red here. So the application site amounts to about 0.2 hectares, and it is to the rear of the properties of 1 to 6 the streets. So I'll be referring to them as the host properties, which is consistent with what I've said in the report. So just to be clear that when I say host properties, I'm referring to those 6 dwellings which make up 1 to 6 the street. And this is the application site here. This is an aerial map of the village. it's certainly in a more concentrated sense. Application site starred in red. You can see obviously that there is a particularly strong grain running along the street frontage. There are pockets of development or examples where that doesn't necessarily follow that line on each side of the road, and obviously there are individual circumstances involved in respect of each of those cases. The matter of backland development is something which is considered repeatedly in the officer reports. And this is slightly zoomed in view of the application site, obviously starred in red. So it does sit on a hill, the street here, which slopes in a southerly direction by a relatively gentle gradient. There is also a slight sloping up to the west, but it's not something that's readily perceived on the ground. You have got footpath 12 here running alongside the western boundary of the site, and obviously open countryside beyond. This is a constraints map there. What this does pick up, obviously, and something that we will no doubt discuss repeatedly and in great detail this morning, this is washed over by conservation area. I'll show you the extent of that area in a moment. And we're obviously dealing with a significant number of listed buildings in the vicinity as well, some of them particularly highly graded. The host properties here, which you can see in red, they are Grade 2 star listed buildings. That means being Grade 2 star, they are particularly important buildings of more than just special interest. It's quite an uncommon designation. Only just about 6% of all listed buildings are Grade 2 star. You can see to the north here Grade 1 buildings, which are ancient houses, and all of those surrounding are generally Grade 2, including the Bell Inn public house just to the south here. Just to the north here, you'll see there is a property which isn't listed, known as the Old Gardens. By comparison to its surroundings, it is a relatively modern introduction to the environment. Members will recall seeing it, obviously, on their site inspection. What you can also see here is this sort of brown line, which I'll show you in a moment on the site plan. That is the settlement boundary for Kersey. The site obviously straddles that boundary. For all intent and purpose, and for sake of caution, officers have considered that this is an application for development in the countryside. This is the Kersey Conservation Area then, defined by this sort of dotted boundary here, which effectively runs from the rectory and the church down here, all the way down Church Hill and up the street, and then also encompassing the Priory. Obviously, Kersey is a village which is on a sustainable tier of the, as a part of the council's core strategy and spatial strategy. It's a hinterland village. Services and facilities are modest, but they do include a church, primary school, village hall, public house, and obviously Hadley is about 2 miles away. Kersey Mill is about a mile away. So if car journeys are required for day-to-day living, those trips would be relatively short. Just again, the historical environment, it's really important, obviously, that members do pick up the significant number of listed buildings in and around the village or this street here, illustrating and highlighting what a sensitive location and village this is. Also, as part of the Kersey Conservation Area appraisal, there are a number of key vistas which are highlighted, a couple of which I'll show you photos of later on in this presentation. But obviously you can see a number of arrows here illustrating where those vistas are and the direction in which they're pointing. For reference, the application site is here, the host property is here where my cursor is. Obviously you can see there are two vistas pointing at one another from the bottom of Church Hill and coming down the street, highlighting particularly how important this view is along the street, and this what's highlighted as being an enclosed area, which obviously members will have appreciated when they went on the site inspection. And this is a slightly enlarged version there, just so members can be absolutely clear. This is a particularly important document reference to note. It's something that's referred to in a number of the reports of heritage advisors that have responded to this application, whether you would say in support of or indeed against. The host properties are shown here in this sort of this red oblong with an outbuilding attached. This is from the 1841 tithe map. The reason this is quite important is as going into great detail in the report, you'll note, and in respect of the various responses that have been received in respect of heritage matters, there has been a long-standing historic link between the wider site, or the application site as we now know it, and those properties themselves. You can see that delineated in this parcel 117 here. So regardless of the fact that there has been some change in the past, and indeed, as members noted on site, the immediate curtilage of those properties and the use of them is now somewhat curtailed, the rest of the site certainly does have an historic relationship and importance to those properties. And just adjacent here, obviously, we've got the Bell Inn here and some outbuildings. You've got parcel 118 and 119 here. This is from the 1902 OS map. You can see now that the extent of the outbuilding has gone, and there is an element here, or at least an outbuilding that remains in this location. Members will have seen that on the site inspection. Again, obviously important to note this area in plan form remains open. Again, the Bell Inn here appearing to be relatively enclosed in building form terms, and then with land behind. This is the site layout. You see the dotted line here, which, as I stated earlier, relates to the settlement boundary. So you can see 4 of the units here at the back. They are most definitely outside of the settlement boundary. The 3 at the front are, in fairness, straddling that line. But as I say, for sake of prudence, it is fair to consider that this is an application proposing development in the countryside. So there are 7 properties proposed, as I say. You have elements of landscaping, the gardens. Obviously, there is quite a notable proportion of hard landscaping. Obviously, this is a relatively crude drawing, but it does show where gardens are proposed, where that hard edge is proposed, where cars would come in and circulate. Obviously, it's important to note that there are 2 access points. One of them would effectively remain as is. The development itself, however, would be served by this northern entrance, which is obviously a matter of particular local concern, especially for the parish council. And this is something that was considered by members on site as well. For the reasons set out in the report, obviously officers, while acknowledging that there will be a requirement for cars to creep out onto the highway if exiting, this, bearing in mind the individual circumstances, for the reasons set out, is considered to be not unacceptable. These are plans and elevations relating to the properties themselves. They're of a 1.5 story nature, and as you saw, they're arranged around a courtyard, I suppose you'd say, with 1 to 4 backing obviously onto footpath 12, and 5 to 7 backing onto the additional parking areas and the gardens of the host properties. So you've got semi-detached pairs in respect of plots 1 to 4 and 6 and 7. Plot 5, which is on this next drawing, is a detached unit. However, they all are actually identical, as you'll note, in scale, form, and detailed design. All of the units have a gross internal floor area of 82 square metres, which is in excess of the nationally described space standard. Facing materials are set to be or shown to be red brick, clay tiles, timber framed fenestration, and there are a number of obviously design flourishes and features which members have considered, and this is discussed in the report, mainly at para 17. It is noted that it is also proposed that all of the dwellings would be highly efficient. They're predicted to achieve an emissions rating 35% above the requirements of building regs, with an EPC predicted of B. It was indicated that an A could be secured, but this would require the installation of solar panels or a wind turbine. And for obvious reasons, given the sensitive context, that's not something that the applicant is proposing. Move on to some photos. This is obviously the front of the host properties as viewed from the street. In terms of age, it's referred to in the listing descriptions and the Historic England response that they are of 15th, 16th and 17th century origin. The application is accompanied by a detailed heritage assessment, not in relation to the impact of the development, I should stress, but purely in relation to the significance of the buildings themselves in terms of their inherent quality, and again, not relating to their setting, certainly not in relation to the rear of those properties. And what that document sets out is that actually, certainly in relation to structures plots 1 and 2, they may indeed originate from the 14th century, so even older, and therefore obviously even more significant, bearing in mind this would make them, or the structures within them, among the oldest in the village. So really important to take that into account, that these are really particularly significant buildings, hence of course their grade 2 star listing. So just looking across from left to right, we've got the units here coming across. And another photo there, just taking the whole range in. We've got numbers 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6 at the end here. This is that part of that structure I referred to, which may well be from the 14th century, and this is that southern access that would remain. And another view of that from the other side. This is a view then of particularly numbers 5 and 6, you can see, and that proposed access point that would serve the development. Obviously, members, we congregated in this area and considered that on the site inspection. This is a view of the street, coming down the street, looking down, where you can see here the host properties, and obviously that clear sort of linear and enclosed space running down, obviously bordered by important buildings on each side. This is one of those vistas that I referred to from the Kersey Conservation Area appraisal. So this is taken from the top of the church steps looking across. So again, you can see the quality of this view, that strong linearity here, but of course picking up what has been referred to in other comments as being detractors, being the old gardens as one example, and then the keep at the top of the hill. This is a slightly enlarged view, just to be slightly clearer. Obviously, then you can see the street here, obviously running around and then up, and then examples of other development behind. You've got the keep, obviously, at the top of the hill. You've got those barn conversions referred to in the report, which are behind the Grade 1 ancient houses. And you've got, obviously, the old gardens here. In terms of visual reference, obviously, there's quite a significant and thick bank of trees which run between the boundary between the Bell Inn and the site, which makes visual connection between those sites quite difficult. But nevertheless, in terms of placing where the development might sit, referring back to the proposed site plan, that back edge of plots 5, 6 and 7 is effectively going to be running about here. This is a view from the bottom of the church steps, so now coming down Church Hill. And then as we begin to come up the street, you can catch the Bell Inn here, and then the host properties just there. This is a photograph of the rear of the host properties, and another one there. One thing that I think there's a couple of things to bear in mind here, members. One of which is that regardless of what you might think or might have read in terms of responses about the quality of the rear of these, whether they have been affected by modern extensions or through the mismatch of treatments of fenestration or detractors potentially in respect of aerials. This is not something that officers are suggesting that you take into account, and particularly there is reference in the officer report at paragraph 268 in respect of the fact that we don't think it would be appropriate to consider the current conditions of the building in relation to this particular decision. The second thing to note is that some of the heritage advisors responding to this application have considered the rear of the buildings to be, to quote, unremarkable. Officers disagree with that, and I think the point made by the council's heritage team is quite important, that the duality of the architecture in respect to these host properties is of itself quite important, with the high architecture frontage clearly very important as it relates to the street scene, and then something very much more modest at the rear, which actually reflects upon the evolution and use of the buildings through time. So that's very important. But in that respect, though, I think it's important to note that, of course, the buildings themselves will remain unaffected by this development, certainly in a physical sense. And obviously, as members will have noted from site, the degree of visual interrelationship between the sites and these properties is a matter of debate. But the fact that you can't see it doesn't mean that it's not harmful. And that's why, obviously, in terms of the officer report, it's really important to consider what has been put before you carefully, and why it is that the inherent historic interest of that site and the relationship between it in the past and those buildings is really an indicator of well, Suffolk Preservation Society called it an important element of its significance. Officers clearly agree with that, and we consider it to be a strong contributor to the significance of those buildings. So obviously that's something very important for members to bear in mind should that relationship be interrupted or changed, as no doubt there will be transformation in light of this application. This is another photo now of the rear of the properties. This is taken sort of just behind what you might call the boundary of those properties now as it runs, and ostensibly this area is now in separate ownership. You see a boundary treatment here. These are the rear of the buildings, obviously beyond that landscaping. This is further into the site then, again looking back as a reference point, that Victorian outbuilding is here, the buildings obviously in this location. This is a photograph taken from another key vista, which you saw on the plan earlier, from the top of the bend, almost adjacent to the footpath, which is just to the right-hand side of the photo. This is then looking across and down. Obviously, you've got the church as a particularly important landmark, looking straight across. Obviously, you've got that barn development here, and the rest of the street you can pick up. The application site, in terms of where the dwellings would be sited, is down and in this area here. It's a matter of judgment, but I think it likely you probably would visually pick up some of the development in this location were it to be approved. This is a slightly enlarged view. Oh, sorry, that's the same photo I showed earlier. This is from the top of footpath 12. Obviously, looking down, members, you'll recall that we went on to footpath 12 at the rear of the site on our site inspection. This is at the bottom of the site and the bottom of that hill that you've just seen a photo of, looking across the car park of the Bell Inn and another property here. Now, on the plans, it's shown that this area would be thickened up. There would be further landscaping just inside this boundary. This is a view then from that same location, but looking across to where the host properties are beyond these trees. This is a view then from the Kersey Road as it comes along here in the bend. So footpath 12, then he's up and then running down. So across the brow of this hill, the application site is sitting in this location here. That then, members, is effectively the presentation. I'm sorry it's not the flashy type that you're used to. This is slightly no frills, but hopefully it conveys the information that you need to bear in mind. But you are obviously directed to the contents of the committee report, where the recommendation is one of refusal. Obviously, officers do note the history here. I can only stress that your decision today, members, is a matter of your own judgment. You have a recommendation before you. It's really important to stress, as no doubt we will cover throughout this meeting, that you do have statutory legal duties to adhere to here today, and that is particularly in relation to heritage. If there is a finding of harm, that is a matter of considerable importance and weight. And there is, and there will be, in those circumstances, a presumption that you will refuse planning permission. It's a rebuttable presumption, but you must have particularly compelling reasons of public benefits to outweigh that harm. I think there, Chairman, it's probably appropriate for me to stop and move on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Stephen Stroh. That's a fairly full report. A couple of things before I go to see if any members got any points of clarification. I've got a couple of things that I just wanted to point out. And one of them was, you referred to paragraph 268, members, that's on page 103 regarding the rear property, the rear view of the properties. I think it's important that you're aware of that. And I've just got a question for clarification, Stephen Stroh, is you did refer in your report backland development. Now, in the past, when we've brought up arguments that by allowing this, it's backland development, we've been told, and very severely told, that backland development isn't really a matter to be considered. Certainly in the urban areas, whether there is you're looking at it different in the countryside, I don't know. But can you just clarify that point? Because obviously it is backland development, but we have allowed and refused lots of backland developments, and usually on the advice that we can't take that as a consideration. What's your comments on that, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think the question of backland development is of particular importance in this instance, especially noting one of the severe warnings that's in the Kersey Conservation Area appraisal, that it's something to be treated with great care. I'm mindful that the previous planning officer didn't find any harm, so to speak, in respect of this being a backland development, which is obviously a generally pejorative term, but they considered it on its merits and felt that, bearing in mind other examples of development that sort of breached that building line or that strong grain along the street would be acceptable, or certainly wouldn't detract from that very particular quality that is evident. If I disagreed with that officer, I would say so, but I think their reasoning was acceptable, and I've endorsed that. Members, of course, you're here to reach your own judgment. You're not bound by my recommendation. You're not bound by my reasoning in respect of landscape or settlement sort of character terms. If you feel that this is particularly inappropriate, then indeed that would be another reason for refusal. But of itself, officers have looked at this, and the consistent position is that they don't think that of itself a quote unquote backland approach is one that's particularly unacceptable. Thank you. Thank
you very much for that. I think that's understandable. Rob, I've got a hand showing, but it doesn't tell me who it is. I don't know.
It's me.
Oh, why doesn't it come up as saying you? Anyway, Councillor Busby, if you like to turn your camera on and your mic and put your point of clarification to the officer.
Yeah, Stephen, you said it was you're treating it as a countryside.
We can't see you.
Well, you should be able to.
Right.
Sorry, Chair, we
Sorry,
might
Chair.
need to ask Mr. Stroud to take down his presentation. I think that might be.
Right.
Oh, you're better off keeping the presentation.
Okay.
You refer to it as a development in the countryside. Really, surely it should be hinterland. I mean, Kersey's hinterland. At least 50% of the development proposal is in the boundary. It's a bit harsh saying we've got to treat the whole thing as in the countryside, isn't it?
It is a matter of your judgment, Councillor Busby. I would think that this still remains a development for a hinterland village, and so the criteria under policy CS11 does apply. Obviously, CS2 is actively engaged. I think that for all intent and purpose, the building here is outside of the settlement boundary. And on that basis, I would urge you to consider this to be a countryside development. It may not be a countryside development in terms of, landscape or village-scape terms, because obviously it is within what is a relatively physically and visually contained site. But for the purposes of the spatial strategy of the council, this is treated as a countryside site, certainly in my view and the view of other objectors to the application. Thus, there is an expectation that to be acceptable in policy CS2 terms, there must be exceptional circumstances and a proven justifiable need. While you'll note in the report that officers do find that there is a proven local need for housing in this village, certainly not justifiable, bearing in mind the heritage harm and indeed the fact that there are no what we would consider to be exceptional circumstances. Hopefully that will help for now, but if we need to discuss CS2 a bit further later on, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. Is there any other hands up? Because I can't see any, so I'm assuming there isn't. For points of clarification, right? We're then down to move.
Chair, there are ones up. I was going to say, if you might not have the participants, if you open the participants pane, it should show them in there.
Participants, wait a minute, where's
There's that button that's next to the what that should have the number 2 over it.
Ah, yes, I can see that. Right. Well, I've hit that. Number 2. No, that didn't. Hang on, let's come out of that. Go into show participants. It's not telling me who's got their hands up, so.
Okay, shall I just find
yeah,
them?
you'll need to tell us then.
We've got Councillor McLaren and Councillor Osborne.
Councillor McLaren. Well, Tarek, Councillor McLaren next, and then I'll come to Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chair. Stephen, can you just clarify the rear of the site? I remember at the inspection visit, the rear of the site has got the public footpath. I might have missed it, but is there going to be a hedge erected at the rear of the site to separate the public footpath from the site?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor McLaren. So you'll recall that, yes, we stood in this area here on the site inspection, and this appeared to be slightly more open than I think the applicant had said that it had been in the past. But nevertheless, if I forgive me, I'll scroll back through the slides. It is shown on the proposed plan, site plan, that sorry, there are obviously a lot of slides.
Members, try and remember the slide numbers if it's helpful.
Yeah, you'll see that it's proposed for that area to be thickened up. You'll note that, members, in the event that you do feel that this is an application that warrants a grant of permission contrary to my recommendation, we would be looking to impose a landscaping condition requiring a particularly detailed specification, and including maturity, obviously, from the outset of what planting is proposed in and around the site, particularly obviously in those areas that are shown by my cursor here. So it's a fairly crude plan, but I think you can judge, members, what the likely landscape effects would be, or indeed what effect that measure might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much. Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've actually read the question I needed to do, but I just need to clarification of it. Section 30, paragraph 33, page 57, heritage objection. What I'd just like to clarify is S66 and S72. It said the enhancement of the character and appearance of the application, or the heritage sites. I've always assumed that the impact is based on area of from where the new application is to the heritage heritage arrangements. So do these consist of an actual distance and screening on these particular heritage sites to be preserved by the setting, obviously by screening and the amount of distance between the new application and the heritage sites? Thank you. Can you just clarify that for me?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Osborne. I think this is, you're almost touching on potentially a question of whether, if you can't see it and if it's adequately screened and separated from the site, that it's not really having a sort of a physical or experiential impact, whether that means that it's not harmful. I think members, bearing in mind that the officer view that's been expressed in the heritage section, I'd really urge you not to find in that direction, simply because this isn't about what you can see. This is about what you can't see, and it's the fact that there is a long-standing connection between this site and those properties, and that connection contributes strongly to the significance of those assets. So the fact that connection, in officers' view, will be broken because of the change of a site which has for centuries remained undeveloped, necessarily results in harm. So automatically then your statutory duties are kicking in, which means that because there's a finding of harm, that's a matter of considerable importance. So you need to be absolutely clear that when you're doing your balance in terms of the harm against the public benefits, that you realise how acute that is as an issue, and it is a particularly serious finding if there is harm, even if it's a low level of harm. Your duties are engaged, and you've got to be absolutely careful when you do that balance and clear that there is a presumption that you should refuse permission unless the benefits are particularly compelling.
Thank you.
I'll just come back, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I just want to thank Stephen for that, and obviously the area that has been marked off on the location map obviously gives that reasoning, and thank you for that clarification. It's helped me for quite a few years. I've always wondered why some of the areas, if they haven't got sufficient screening and obviously distance between those properties, what the criteria is. But thank you.
Good that it's helped you, Councillor Osborne. Rob, I cannot see. I still see a hand up, but I don't know whose it is, so you're going to have to help me there.
We've got Councillor Jameson and then Councillor Barrett.
Right, we'll take Councillor Jameson and your question of clarification, please.
Thank you, Chair. Stephen, you probably said this during your presentation, so sorry if you did, but can you clarify which of the properties are affordable and which are up for open sale on the open market?
Sorry, Councillor James. Well, you're absolutely spot on in that I didn't say that. So thank you. It's a very good question. So it's a build to rent scheme, which means that plots 1 to 4, which are the ones at the back here. And in fact, I realised I did actually put a site plan at the end of my presentation. I thought ahead. There you go. Sorry, I forgot earlier. Plots 1 to 4 are the ones that will be affordable, i.e. those are the ones that would be secured in perpetuity by legal agreements to meet the definition of affordable housing. The ones at the front would be for market rent. I think the the arrangement there and the proposal is probably something you would like to ask of the applicant, I would say. I had understood that the strategic housing manager was looking to come and join this meeting to explain, but as I said, she's given written comments highlighting the terms upon which the affordable housing would be secured. But in direct answer to your question, Councillor Jameson, it's the 4 at the back that are affordable. The front 3 are for
rent. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, yeah,
Councillor
thanks for
Barrett.
that.
Thank you. Just a couple of points for you, Stephen. There is talk in the report about the benefit of the affordable units, but should we also be considering the benefit of the market houses equally, or to a lesser extent? And there is another point I wanted to clarify with you. You talk about the connection with the rear garden of the host properties remaining underdeveloped. Is that affected at all by the fact that the significance of it in years past must have been as for producing vegetables and for some livestock, which is no longer the case? Does that lessen the significance of the connection?
Okay, thanks.
I don't. Sorry to interrupt you, Stephen. I don't know whether Julie Abbott-Taylor can help out on any of this. I saw her hands come up.
Ah, good. Well, perhaps if I just, while it's in my head,
and then bring her in at the appropriate time.
I'll cover Councillor Barrett's point. In terms of the scheme benefits, Councillor Barrett, I've covered that towards the end of the report, certainly in relation to the heritage balance, para 262 to 268, where I give my view on the benefits. Housing is of itself an important benefit, which is significant of itself. But what I do then stress is obviously that ought to be tempered, really, bearing in mind that this is obviously a minor scheme. And that obviously we do have a 5-year land supply, and indeed, and rightly, as the Richard Buxton solicitor's letter points out, we've passed the housing delivery test, and indeed very clearly and positively so. Supply and deliverability, the delivery test, two slightly different things. One has an eye looking forwards and one looking backwards, and actually Babergh as a district's doing very well in both respects. But on the other hand, and as we noted in the appeal decision in respect of Long Melford, there is demonstrated here to be a local need, which of itself, and obviously land supply is district-wide, this is a matter which members might think is quite important in these circumstances. So the scheme benefits are there set out in the report, which includes, for example, the housing of itself, which has inherent social and economic benefits through construction and then ongoing spend at occupation. The space standards, I think, are a benefit. While we don't have a policy, I think the current circumstances in a wider context highlight perfectly why it is that we need homes that are of a suitable scale and with gardens indeed as well. Obviously, the buildings are all efficient. That's really important from an environmental perspective, at least, and indeed economic in terms of saved costings in terms of emissions and bills. And obviously in the context of the council having declared a climate emergency. And then of itself, obviously, affordable housing is an important benefit and a significant one, notwithstanding the local context, but also bearing in mind that we simply are failing to meet demand in respect of affordable housing, and that's probably something that Julie Abbott-Taylor can touch on.
Stephen, I'm going to go to Julie because these are just points of clarification. I don't want to curtail anybody, but we have got a long way to go. But perhaps Julie Abbott-Taylor can help you answer this and to the satisfaction of Councillor Barrett. Julie?
Okay, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. It's just, yes, in regard to Councillor Barrett's question, the 3 properties at the front part of the development are for market rent, and in terms of when I looked at the whole supply and different tenure availability in the village, certainly they would be of, there is a lack of supply of both affordable and private rent.
Thank you. Any other points of clarification from any members? There's no more hands up, Robert? No?
Chair.
Sorry, who's that?
Oh, sorry, Chair, that was myself, Stephen. Yeah, I just, there was the other question that I just thought useful to clarify, Councillor Barrett. I think in terms of that historic usage, I direct Councillor Barrett to paragraph 206 of the report, which sets out and repeats the views of Historic England, which I think are particularly relevant to that question that she's asked.
Page 90. Page 90.
Yeah, that long-standing relationship between the site and the host properties, regardless of whether they're now in separate ownership or there is a more curtailed curtilage to those buildings now. It's that undeveloped nature and that ability to appreciate that historic link, which is of importance, and its loss, which represents harm in this case. Thanks.
Thank you. No other questions from members for clarification to the officer? No. Right, we'll move on now to public speakers. First of all, I'm going to ask the parish representative, John Hume, to speak. You, sir, have up to 3 minutes in which to address the committee. Perhaps at the end of the 3 minutes, you'll be there, and I'll see if there's any questions for you. Perhaps you can turn your mic on and your camera on, and when you're ready, the clock will start ticking. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if you can hear or see me, but all I can see is Mr. Stroud.
Right. Hold on. Stephen, can you remove your participation? There we are. Now we're
Chair, absolutely. Sorry about that. Thanks.
That's fine. I can see you, and I assume all members can see and hear you. You sir have 3 minutes if you'd like to start now. Thank you.
Thank you. Please refuse this application. We, as representatives of the community, voted against it 5 times, supported by the vast majority of local residents and visitors. Your officer, the Heritage Team, Suffolk Preservation Society, and Historic England have all recommended refusal. There is no doubt that there will be permanent heritage harm. Kersey is an historic village. The application goes to the conservation area edge, over the built-up area boundary, is in the curtilage of 600-year-old Grade 2 listed buildings in the Brett Valley Special Landscape Area. There will be serious damage to landscape, setting, views from the street, and from footpaths 12 and 19, Priory Hill and the church. It's Historic England, not any private consultant, who is the final arbiter on national heritage in this country. They state that the link between the street and the field is a key feature of the historic properties. It is wrong logically and in law to assert only the front of the buildings should be considered. Historic England recommend refusal. The Linton House Inspector decided Kersey's unique single row of buildings with gardens open to the country were significant factors. The proposal has 2 extra rows inconsistent with a linear layout. Half the plot is hard standing. The application contradicts NPPF and, among others, local plan policies CS11, 15 and CR04. There will be 40 extra daily traffic movements through those narrow entrances. In the centre, excluding holiday lets, are 18 private rentals, of which 4 are currently unoccupied, including for the street, owned by a company associated with the applicant. Babergh's land supply and delivery rate meant housing was only given moderate weight in the Vane Lane refusal. The Parish Council have supported 6 recent housing applications. The nearby 1980s houses, such as Old Gardens, are on the footprint of existing buildings. If you dislike their design, More mistakes are not the answer. This special setting and the Grade 2 starred listed 1 to 6 demand respect. The heritage arguments against this proposal are unassailable. There is no doubt the application would destroy Kersey's historic character, contrary to key national and local policy aims. For our culture and future generations, please refuse permission for this vandalistic proposal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Members, is anybody putting their hand up to ask a question to the parish representative? Yes, Councillor Mary McCann, would you like to put your question? Unmute and camera, that's well done.
Is that okay?
Yes, that's lovely. We've got both of you.
Mr. Hume, I tried, in preparation for this meeting, I tried to find out as much about your village as I could. I liked the Lichfield report because it gave me an idea about the composition of housing.
Your question, Mary?
Yeah. Having worked out on the 2011 census, it looks to me as if 103 properties in your village are owned. So I was really surprised in the comments by one of your village residents that housing would vitalise an otherwise second home village. Diversity should be encouraged. What proportion of the 103 are second homes in Kersey?
Good question.
Right. Well, the answer to that question is that there are 72 houses in the immediate centre of the village. How many are second homes is probably less than half a dozen. The important thing, though, here is the number of rental properties that are available, and this is in relation to affordable housing, where the rents for most of those are between £400 and just under £800 a month. Now, that seems like, I'm at an age now where that seems like a lot of money, but apparently in relative terms, that's an affordable rent. We are a very mixed community, in answer to your question as well about the survey. And there's often a suggestion that the village is a kind of rest home for retirees. That's not the case. There's a very mixed age distribution in the village now. We have got quite a lot of churn as well, with people coming and leaving. With, I think there are half a dozen houses in the parish which are on the market at the moment. So we've also got something like, out of 350 people in the parish, we've got 23 vibrant charities and organisations and networks, which is quite remarkable for a parish of our size. So the answer to your question is what is the percentage of second homes is one I can't give you an exact answer to, but it is relatively low in comparison to the overall housing stock that we have in the parish.
Thank you. Mary, did you want
Well,
to...
I was just going to say, well, that's an interesting comment, given the comment by the comment made by somebody that lives in your village. That gave a wrong impression, actually.
Well, that's something you must weigh up in your mind, Mary. I don't think we can expect the parish to be able to answer that. He's not in the mind of some of the people there. Any other questions to Councillor Barrett? Mary, that's it. Well done. Yes, we can see and hear you.
Hello. Good morning, Mr. Hume. I think you just mentioned a number of properties in the one to number 6, the street, that were vacant. Can you just clarify that? I didn't quite catch it.
I said that there was, if I could look at my spiel, I said that there were, excluding holiday lets in that part of the village, there were 18 private rentals. 4 are currently empty. And that includes number 4 of between 1 to 6 the street. So number 4 the street, which, as I said at the time, is owned by a company associated with the applicant.
Yeah, we know. Yeah. So it was only one of those, that 1 to 6, that was empty.
At the moment, yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. I can't see any other hands up. No? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Hume. If you'd like to turn your camera and mic off, we'll move on. We have an objector. Anne Baker, you wish to speak. You have 3 minutes also in which to address the committee. Perhaps at the end of it, if you remain where you are, I'll see if there's any questions for you. If you'd like to turn your mic on and your camera on, and your 3 minutes will start after that.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
I'm going to stop you and ask them to start. I have some builders I'm going to ask them to stop so that people can hear you clearly. Hello, can you just stop? Right, that's fine. Sorry about that, Anne Barker. Right, I'll ask Rob to start your 3 minutes now. Stop drilling. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm a retired police officer and have lived at Mill House opposite the entrance to the proposed site for 15 years. Being no doubt that the vast majority of villagers, 77% of those who wrote to the council and live in the parish, object to this application. Kersey is a special village. It's not just about listed buildings, but also about their long gardens ending in open countryside. My garden is one of them. The cottages at 1 to 6 are let, apart from number 4, which is uninhabitable and has been empty for some years. A wasted opportunity to house someone with a link to Kersey, and frankly, a disgraceful neglect of a Grade 2 star listed dwelling. Until recently, the residents of 1 to 6 enjoyed the use of the whole of their gardens. Sadly, the occupants are no longer allowed to tend the full length of the plot. This has resulted in it becoming untidy and overgrown. I can only suppose that the landlord thinks this will make the area look like a potential building site, persuading you to grant planning permission. But for the moment at least, the residents of 1 to 6 share a benefit enjoyed by most of Kersey, an outlook onto open rolling countryside. If this development is built, they will look out onto parked cars, hard standing, and the backs of modern houses. Historic England fears that this will make the listed cottages less attractive to future tenants and so increase the possibility of further deterioration. The applicant has offered 4 of the 7 proposed houses as affordable. This is a good thing, but surely there are less sensitive sites in the parish than the ancient gardens of a Grade 2 star listed building. You will be aware that permission for only one house on a similar plot next door to me has recently been refused. If you think that an offer of affordable housing justifies building in gardens, where is the justification for the private houses, which are also a part of this application? The only person who benefits there is the developer. This is about profit, not social good. The long gardens in Kersey are a precious resource, a part of history, and as old as the village itself. Their wanton destruction severs the connection between village and open country and is irreversible. I urge the committee to accept their officer's recommendation to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, I'll see if there's anyone going to put the hand up. Could I just say, Mary, you already show a hand up. After you've spoken, can you lower your hand? So I don't know whether you do want to speak now, because you're showing on my screen with your hand up.
Chairman, I've no idea why that's come on its own. Sorry.
Oh, right. Well, if you hover over it, and that should say lower, and then press the button and see if it goes down. But we'll carry on then. I'll ignore that.
It has now. Okay.
Oh, well done. Rob, is there any? Oh yes, Councillor Barrett has got a question. Yep. Councillor Barrett.
I think it's Councillor Busby, Chair, as well.
Yes, I can see
Barrett
him, but I've gone to Councillor Barrett.
Sorry, Chair.
Okay.
Councillor Barrett,
Right.
I think you're on mute, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
I haven't got a question,
Oh,
actually.
you haven't got a question. Okay. Well, if you can lower your hand, hover over and press the button, that should do it. Councillor Busby, your hand is up and you're there, and we can hear you, hopefully. Would you like to put your question?
Yeah, it's just a clarification, really. You said that 77% of the people were against this development. Yeah, I looked at the last 12 months of individual representation. There were 32 in favour and only 14 against. So how do you come to your 77%?
We went through all the letters on the Babergh District website and made a spreadsheet of those for and against, which came to 77%, as I worked out. Some of the letters supporting were even from as far as New Zealand and the Orkney Islands.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No. Councillor Barrett, you're not. I can still see you, but the camera's on. Okay, thank you very much then, Anne.
Thank you.
Baker. We'll move on. We now have a supporter who wishes to speak, Andrew Rogers. You, sir, also have 3 minutes in which to address the committee. I'll see if there's any question to you afterwards. If you'd like to turn your camera on and your mic on. Yes, I can see you, and presumably we can all hear you now. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Hello all. Thank you. My name is Andrew Rogers and I'm speaking in support of the application. I have lived in the area for 15 years and married into a family who have lived in Kersey for over 30 years. I am a former chair of governors of Kersey School, a school both my children attended. In the interests of transparency, I am a member of the parish council, but I'm speaking from a personal perspective, not as a parish council representative, and there is no way I wish to undermine the decision of the parish council. There are several reasons why I, as well as many other local people, support this application. With regards to the location, the obvious place to build new houses is within the village. The proposed location is currently a messy, disused area and has been for years, with no use to the village at all. If the planned homes are built there, they will be in the heart of the village. There would be no impact on the surrounding countryside and farmland, and no impact on the historical street scene. Nothing is destroyed, and neither should it be. The benefits are numerous, as the occupants will bring vibrancy and add to the dynamic of the village. The affordability of these homes will allow lower income or younger people to enjoy living in Kersey. Crucially, many younger people would love to live in Kersey, but at the moment they cannot afford to do so. The school has lost numbers over the recent years, and the vast majority of its pupils are from outside of the catchment. It is sad to see this slow decline. How fantastic could it be to see 7 families walking up the hill to the school? Who knows, there may even be a teacher living there too. The development itself is small, contained, and sympathetically designed to blend into its surroundings. The plan for just 7 environmentally efficient small homes built in a Victorian cottage style is appropriate for Kersey, and it will ensure that Kersey has played its part in the national housing shortage. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Members, have you any questions for the last speaker, Andrew Rogers? No, I can't see any. Rob?
Yes, sorry, we had Councillor Ayres had a hand up there for a moment.
Councillor Ayres, turn your camera on and your mic on and put your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to the committee. Can I just ask, what is the present role at Kersey School? Do you have any idea? Are you still chairman or not?
I'm not a chairman anymore. When I was there, we had 82, 83 children. The nominal roll is 77. The last I heard, they were down to about 60. It was just over 50. Last year, I think they had just over 58 or something. There must be low 60s now. But to keep the school going, you need, for back when I was there 3 years ago, we needed at least 68, 70 children to make sure it wasn't loss making, basically.
Right. How many of those are local children to those that come in from other villages? Do you know?
When I was there, it was about 80% were from outside of the catchment. So there were only 20% within Kersey catchment area, basically. But some of them, such as my own children, have grown up now. So they've gone on. They're on to senior school now.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'll take that as no then. Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. We'll move on. I will now ask the applicant to speak, and that's Andrew Harden. You, sir, also have 3 minutes in which to address the committee, and I'll see if there's any questions for you at the end of it. Perhaps you'd turn your camera on and your mic on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Well, good morning, everybody. It was 5 years ago when I first sought pre-application advice from your heritage officer, Patrick Taylor, on whether it would be possible to build some small cottages on land to the rear of 1 to 6 the street in Kersey. Patrick was a very experienced officer who had written the conservation area appraisals for all of Babergh and Mid Suffolk, and more specifically for Kersey itself. And he said that in his view it was a great idea. Small homes for local people to rent in a very expensive village. He said for us to expect some resistance from a few locals and also from English heritage, but he would support the proposals. On that basis of that advice, we took the plunge and started this journey. We have had many reports written and many studies done. We consulted with Historic England, and the scheme has now been designed 3 times, each time changed on Historic England's advice, until the scheme you have before you went before this committee in November 2017, 2.5 years ago. You voted to approve the application then, and we were delighted. But a few local objectors were not happy. They employed a solicitor to try and find fault with your decision, with the way your officers conducted the application, and with us and our proposals. We have had to spend another 2.5 years re-examining in minute detail every aspect of our application. Your officers have been forced to do an enormous amount of work to simply prove that they had done their jobs properly and that your decision was robust. Well, it was. The need for these small homes is unquestionable. Over 40 letters of support originally, and an almost unheard of amount, a school fading through lack of children, a fossilising village, a post office closing, and like many others, the postmistress's own children having to move away because of the lack of affordable homes. She notes that Kersey has lost 35 cottages which have been knocked through to make 16 large houses, a loss of 19 families to the village. Kersey is becoming polarised. The village needs homes for young people to keep it vibrant and the school alive. This is a chance to gain 7 new, environmentally efficient, beautiful small cottages for local people in the heart of the village at a rent they can afford. Surely that must outweigh any less than substantial harm that may, in someone's subjective opinion, be caused to the setting of the rear of the listed cottages. There is no harm to the street scene at all. We have a duty to future generations. Please help us restore the balance of housing in Kersey and support these proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Members, Suez, you've still got your hand up. I don't know if you're new, whether it's a new hand or the old one you haven't lowered. Thank you. I've got a hand appeared, but I don't know who it is. So, Rob, can you help?
It's Councillor Lee Jameson, Chair.
Right. Councillor Jameson, your question to the applicant.
Hello, Mr. Harding. Thanks for coming this morning. There's been a lot of mention about number 4, that your company owns that property and it's been empty for years. I just wondered if you had any comments on the reasons behind that.
Most certainly I do. Thank you very much for bringing it up and giving me the opportunity to respond to what is effectively, I suppose, a slur thrown at me by the objectors. The property was number 4 Street, was lived in by an old lady who actually died there. She was born in that cottage as well and lived her entire life in that cottage, a true local. The cottage, unfortunately, is in poor condition. It needs a complete going over, and it would be illegal for us to rent it at the moment because the electrics are unsafe. It was intended that the property would be renovated completely 2.5 years ago when we expected to be building these 7 cottages. So it isn't our fault it's vacant. It's in fact the objector's fault it's vacant. We will be doing it as soon as the other properties are, if we are able to build them. If you vote in favour, then we'll be able to build them, and it won't be 7, it will be 8 properties coming onto the market for rent in Kersey. The other point he makes is about the rental properties, saying there's 5 empty rental properties. I think it's as the objectors used my name personally in owning the property. I think it should be right that we say that the leader of the parish council, in fact, owns a 1-bedroomed property, and that is available. I checked on Google this morning, available to rent at up to £754 a week. Our properties won't be even that a month. I just think I ought to make that point.
Members, it is entirely up to you whether you wish to take on board that final point. We're here for planning. Thank you.
Can I just come back? So if the application is refused today, will number 4 be renovated anyway and put up for rent, or?
Well, of course it will. Of course it will. We obviously we had builders lined up to come in to do the whole thing, and because of that, because we were delayed or refused, or we weren't refused. It's still an active approval. We were simply challenged by the objectors, and we have gone down this route to prove that everything we've said and done is in fact correct.
So just to be clear, number 4, regardless of whether a permission is approved or refused here this morning, number 4 will in due course be renovated.
That is correct.
Thank you. I hope that helps, Councillor Jameson. Any other? Yeah. No, he's gone. Right. Any other questions? There's a hand appeared. Rob?
We've got Councillor Mary McLaren and Councillor Lee Parker, Chair.
Right. Mary McLaren, would you like to carry on?
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Harding. Are we ready? Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. Yes.
I was interested in the Lichfield report because you actually, that was part of your application. When we look at the present 1- and 2-bedroom homes in Kersey, they are occupied by single people and older people under 65. That was according to the census. As this village is really short of young people and young families, perhaps more correctly, did you not consider building 3-bedroom houses on that site?
We took advice from a number of people, on a number of different people, on what would be suitable for rented accommodation. To clear up a point on that, the 3 properties inside that are market properties will be rented the same way as the affordable properties will be rented, and it was our judgment from taking advice from several different parties that 2-bedroom properties were what were really short, because all of the small cottages, or many of them, as I said in my little speech, that, and I quote, 35 cottages, small cottages, have been lost because they've been knocked through, been bought by people outside the village, knocked through to make 16 large houses, meaning that there is 19 small families lost to the village. We're trying to put that right.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hugh.
Thank you. Perhaps you'll lower your hand, Mary, and that should work for us. Councillor Parker?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Harding. Just if you could clarify for us with regards to page 54, paragraph 20 sets out how the allocation of these properties might be set out, and it says there that a Section 106 agreement will be in place to ensure appropriate nomination rights allocations, and the units would be available in perpetuity. So have you got any sense, have you had any sense at this stage that that there is definite demand from within the village for the, you know, so the plots 1 to 4, they will definitely go to locals? Can you confirm that?
Absolutely, I can confirm that. I can confirm that for several different ways. When 5 years ago, when we first brought this application, we put a notification on the 3 village notice boards that we were to have a public meeting. We put them up over the weekend, and the meeting was to be on the Tuesday. So they were only up there for well, they never made it because most of them got torn down by 1 or 2 disgruntled residents. But nevertheless, the village hall was packed. And before we got to that meeting, we had already had 7 applications for homes in Kersey from Kersey residents. So there is what undoubtedly, and everybody knows this, if you need further confirmation, if you talk to the housing officer, I'm sure she'll be able to confirm that there are. As regards protecting that status, I've been in negotiations with the housing department, and I have agreed that the properties will be offered to rent, and then first of all that the only people from Kersey parish itself will get the first dibs on them, the highest priority. And then if there's nobody available within Kersey that requires them, then we move to the other surrounding villages, and then slightly further out to further surrounding villages. So it is the absolute crux of our deliverability, our delivering affordable housing. It's what we are about. We want to deliver housing for local people and low cost housing. That's what we're about.
Thank you. I think your point's been made. Thank you. Nothing else, Councillor Parker. No. No other hands up. So I'll take that as no one else has got any more questions for you. Thank you very much, Mr. Harding. Right, we will now go into debate, and members try not to repeat some of the things you've already said and heard and what have you. I will open up the debate. I'm going to invite the ward member, Councillor Jameson, to start the debate. And then members, if you'd like to indicate by putting your hands up, and hopefully Rob will keep me updated. Thank you.
Okay, Chair, thanks for that. Not a lot to say at this stage. Obviously, this application is all about the heritage and the listed properties, and it's just whether we feel the public benefits outweigh the irreversible damage to the setting of the Grade 2 style listed building. So for now, I'd just like to hear the thoughts of the other councillors on the committee, and I'll come back later. That's okay.
Right, thank you. Right, members, is there any hands up? Councillor Ayres, would you like to start, and then hopefully other hands might appear? No one's got anything to say?
Yes, I am.
Right.
Hi. Yes.
Camera. Lovely.
I'm very confused because, you know, there seems to be so many differing things being told, and it's I, for one, would like to see more local people living in the village, but I'd like sort of more answers as to how many really are holiday homes, and I think we need a little more clarity, please.
I don't know whether Julie Abbott-Taylor can help us here, Stephen, or whether you might have the answers. But I think Councillor Jameson was right. It is this question of the heritage versus this local need, if there is such one. Can you help, Stephen?
Yeah, it may be easier in a moment that Julie comes in
Right.
to cover this, and also actually as a response in terms of why it might be that 2-bed properties are preferable to 3-bed in the circumstances. I think, in all honesty, it's going to be very difficult to work out what is a holiday home and what isn't. But I think that's maybe slightly missing the point. I think the fact is, and with the Lichfield report that officers endorse the conclusions of, this is a village which hasn't seen well, it's seen very relatively little growth over a significant period of time. It has an ageing profile, and given the way that these things work, the churn is relatively low, regardless of whether something's coming on the market or not. It's the case that people who buy, if they're of an older age and we've got an ageing profile, that they're less likely to move, and that opportunity for churn over time becomes less and less strong. There is an opportunity here, certainly based on the methodology set out in the Lichfield report, to get housing into a village which needs it. There's considered to be a proven local need here. It's important to note that methodology, while obviously been treated on its own merits in the particular circumstances of this case, is one which was accepted by the planning inspector and the Secretary of State in the Long Melford appeal. But that does not of itself make the scheme justifiable, and that's where, as Councillor Jameson rightly says, this is about balancing the harm between, as opposed to the heritage assets, with the public benefits.
Thank you.
So I think at this point, yes, probably right that Julie chips in.
Yeah, I don't know whether Julie wanted to chip in right now, because I have got 2 other hands up, which is Councillor Busby and Councillor Barrett. I didn't know whether I could bring you in after that, because I think they may touch on this particular point. So I'll bring you after these 2 speakers, Julie. So Councillor Busby, you're there and up and running.
Thank you. Yes, Steve, we had received a document from the applicant which showed the extract for the listings for the various cottages, and it showed that they were graded for their importance in the street scene. Was this an accurate extraction from the listing? Was there more in there that we haven't seen, or is that the accurate portrayal of why they were listed?
Yeah, I'm struggling to pull it back up, but it's I think, save for the points of emphasis that somebody has used in terms of highlighting and underlining, they were a correct reflection. In fact, the listing descriptions are copied word for word at para 218 of the officer report, and it does state that they were graded for their importance in the street scene. That doesn't mean that of themselves are not important. I suppose you might infer that it may be the reason why they have an enhanced status.
Page 93, members. Yep, carry on.
Thank you, Chair. As I say, that doesn't get away from the fact that they are still important buildings. They are designated heritage assets. There are the various values which contribute to the significance of those assets, which are set out in the report. But also, of course, the setting has a contribution as well, and that's where we are finding the harm in this case. So, whereas that important street scene contribution will remain, where it's the case that physically the building will remain unharmed, it is that setting which is making a strong contribution to the significance, which is where the harm lies.
Thank you. I think you've made that point.
Can I just carry on that point? I mean, I think it shows that the most important part is the street scene, and I think most people would say that this development will not have any impact on the street scene. I mean, even the photographs you had to get to some very strange positions to be able to possibly even see the roof of these developments. So I don't think there's any impact on the street scene, in which case the harm for heritage is purely on the back part of the plots. If you could go to slide 8, please, Stephen, which shows the street scene and the houses surrounding it. Sorry, that'll probably do, actually. The reason for my point is that we've got some grade 1 listed building almost next door. That one there, yep. Which has got the barns built behind it. Surely that was an important aspect in terms of heritage as well. Then we've got that monstrosity of a building right next door to the application site. And you've also got buildings to the south of the application site in the back gardens. So it's almost as though the precedent has been set that development in those back spaces between the road and the footpath has been permitted. So I question whether this plot is any more important than the grade 1 listed building above.
Stephen?
Yes, Chair. It's not only is it a question of harm, but it's a question of how much harm. And I think that there is a consensus amongst all of the heritage opinions that you've got before you and summarised in my officer report, that there is less than substantial harm. That immediately triggers your statutory duties. It brings into play the requirement to undertake the balancing exercise at MPPF 196. But what it doesn't necessarily tell you is how harmful it is. And between the opinions, there aren't many which pin their colours to the mast in that respect. Officers have given you a reasoned way of approaching that exercise, between nothing, which is obviously preservation, and no harm, up to that cusp of where substantial harm might lie, which of course is something that would mean that in settings terms, you would be losing very much of the significance of the asset, which as a matter of judgment doesn't feel right, because there are a number of reasons why these assets are particularly important and where they derive that significance from. But it is nevertheless, we are looking at harm to a strong contributor to that significance. And that's why, even if it's at a medium level, between 0 and 90, that midpoint is still particularly serious. And that's why members, and even irrespective of whether you think it's a low level of harm or not, and I certainly, do not think this is trifling, even if it were at a low level, that still engages those same duties. You still have to give it considerable importance. And members, you need to be absolutely clear in taking a decision today that you are showing all observers that you are giving that importance, and you are weighing it up, and you are then putting it against the public benefits where there is a presumption that you should refuse. You don't have to refuse. You don't have to follow my recommendation, but you need to be absolutely clear.
Thank you, Stephen. I think you made that point quite clear now.
Okay. Sorry, can I carry on then?
Yep, carry on.
I mean, Stephen, that's exactly right. It's always a balancing situation here, isn't it? We've got to balance up the benefits against the harm. And but I personally accept that there is some harm from this development behind the cottages. It's subjective, though. It's very difficult to put to quantify it in terms of an amount. On the other side of the equation, you've got the benefits, and we do know that's a fact, that the benefits will be, well, significant, I guess, possibly significant in maintaining the viability of Kersey. In your report, you said that there's been lower than average growth in Kersey than its surroundings, so we know there's been very little built, and there's one house has been identified as being built up to 2024, despite the fact that there's a perceived need of at least 11 dwellings. If there was alternative sites to meet the demand and the need for housing in Kersey, then the public benefits of this site would probably be less. But there aren't any other sites available. Therefore, this, in my view, makes the public benefits even greater, because it's the only site that's come forward to help the viability of the village. And therefore, on the scale of whether it's the benefits outweigh the harm, at this point, I suspect, in my view, they do. But I'm happy to hear counter arguments.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Barrett, followed by Councillor Jameson, I believe. Councillor Barrett?
Thank you, Chairman.
Can you take down the your screen, Stephen? Right, thank you. Yeah, carry on, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. I agree with Councillor Busby. I was just sort of thinking very much along the same lines. We are not heritage experts, and we try and reflect the views of the person in the street, which I think is, you know, right. That we bring that to the decision making, and we do sometimes struggle with the heritage view of harm. And I think that, you know, is very much a judgment issue. But it's that matter of judgment of harm weighed against the actual tangible benefits that this scheme would bring, allowing people to stay in the village. And as Councillor Busby has talked about alternative sites, those alternative sites, if they were available, may very well be in the special landscape area, and then we'd be having to struggle with, well, what's the harm of that, and weighing up that harm, meaning that no site is likely to be without any level of harm. And we have to kind of put it into some context of people's lives. People need houses, they need that level of security, and to be able to live locally if they've got a strong connection, or perhaps downsizing into a property, don't want to move away from the village, against the very nuanced sort of level of harm. So I think, you know, I'm more than I really want to safeguard those heritage assets, but I don't believe that this scheme presents the level of harm that makes it unacceptable.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Jameson and Councillor Busby, followed by Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that if, as Councillor Busby commented, we're going to talk about properties behind other heritage assets in the village and other developments, we also need to consider the recent refusal by both Babergh and the Secretary of State of the Linton House development. It was a single house built behind a house opposite this development, proposed development, that was refused on grounds of damage to setting and damage to the Kersey conservation area, and that's very recent. So I just wanted to make sure that, you know, we do consider that as well.
Good point. Thank you very much. Councillor Busby.
Sorry, Chair, I took my hand down. It was
right. Okay. Well, I'll go to Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Right. Okay. So this is as involved an application as we've seen for a very, very long time, and we're going to have to be very, very careful about how we weigh all this up and how we balance it up. But for me, what is screaming out that this is a straight argument of need versus harm, purely and simply. And I'm listening to the comments that my colleagues, councillor colleagues, have made. And for example, Councillor Barrett says that we're not heritage experts. I would counter, therefore, that we have to rely on the expert opinion that is before us. And there is 28 pages of heritage evidence before us, Chair, and a phenomenal weight of evidence for us to weigh up and consider. But for me, para 147 on page 81 is really telling, really significant. So if we're talking about need versus harm, para 147 asks the very simple question: will the development result in diminution or enhancement? So if we go along those lines, is the street scene in Kersey, is the setting of Kersey, is it enhanced by this development? And I would have to say that I struggle with that. I don't think that it would be enhanced. Para 194 on page 88, Chair, and you alluded to this at the very beginning, talks about potentially backland development, and it mentions that Kersey has remained largely unchanged for more than a century, with the introduction of backland dwellings being extremely irregular. So, to my mind, I think something that Councillor Busby said is that there aren't any other sites available. There aren't any other sites available at this time. That's not to say that other sites wouldn't come forward at some point in the future. So for me, in terms of the balance between the need, we obviously have an acute need. We have a need for housing now. But do we address that need? And this is the most challenging application, as I said, that I've faced for a long time. So do we address that need by causing permanent and scarring damage to the existing landscape of Kersey? I don't think we do, Chair. In my opinion, that would be my thoughts on the matter. But I'm more than happy to listen to my colleagues' other opinions. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think there's any more hands up.
Yes, Chair, yes, please.
Who's Councillor Plum? Ah, right, yes, you've just appeared. Okay, over to you.
Thank you, Chair.
Your camera? No, we can't see you yet. We can hear you, but we can't see you. Turn your camera on.
There we are.
Done.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I thought I haven't had much to say, and I've been listening very closely to what all my colleagues are saying. And I've just a couple of points that I'd like to make. Past development, if we've had development in backlands in the past, that's not a reason to allow it now. Mistakes have been made in the past, or perhaps something is not quite to our liking now. Let's not try and do it again. And the one important point to me is agreeing with Councillor Parker that if the harm occurs, it cannot be undone. And we, as an organisation, will be leaving that as the heritage for our next generation. So, Chair, if I could, and if this is the time, can I propose that we accept the officer's recommendation?
Thank you. I will accept that as a proposal. I must ask the committee, is there anybody who would like to second this, please?
Chair, I'll be happy to second that proposal.
That's Councillor Lee Parker. Do you wish to speak at this moment?
No, I've said all I need to say at the moment, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so we do have a proposal to accept the officer's recommendation. So members will carry on. I think from what I'm hearing from members, it really comes down to harm versus need. And this is a very difficult one. Is there anybody else that wishes to comment? No. Councillor Jameson. Cameron. Lovely.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I'd just like to agree with Councillor Plum and Councillor Parker that once this development is in place, as good as it is and as environmentally wise, it's a very good development. But once it's there, the damage to the setting of the Grade 2 style listed building is irreversible, and at the moment, that, as Heritage have said, that land is part of the historic legacy of the Grade 2 building. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. Right, members, I can't see any other.
We've just got one more chair.
JA.
Julie Abbey Taylor.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I forgot you, Julie. I think you ought to come in now.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to check whether you had forgotten or not.
I had forgotten.
I'm just trying to remember what the question was. I think certainly Councillor Barrett asked, or somebody asked about whether 2 bedrooms was the most appropriate need. Having looked at the sort of demographic data and the property breakdown in the village, it was felt that 2 bedrooms was most appropriate for available for rent in this area, and certainly looking at our choice-based lettings data, that 1 and 2 beds are always in the highest demand. So I don't know if there were any other points that I've missed that were raised. If so, please, if somebody could let me know.
Yeah, I think Councillor Busby might have thought of something.
Well, I'd just like to ask Julie, was she aware of any other potential sites that would be suitable for development in Kersey?
I will also ask Stephen to comment. I believe there has been another application for a site in the Vale in Kersey, but it's not a scheme that I have worked on personally, but I'm not sure whether Stephen can comment on that, and I can't recall whether it's a full or an outline application, but it's for a similar number of properties, I believe.
Well, we'll see if Stephen can help you out. Stephen, officer.
Yeah, hello, Chair. Yeah, so there was an application referred to in the report refused at Vale Lane. Actually, there was a resubmission, which has also recently been refused on similar grounds. Obviously, the impacts and effects and benefits are all different, but yes, that site, while potentially available, was refused. So clearly unsuitable based on landscape harm, it being in the open countryside and the SLA, and also being clearly within the appreciable setting of the conservation area. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, members, I can't see any new hands going up.
We've got Councillor Barrett, Chair.
Oh, have we? Sorry, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Just wanted to say, actually, the one of the benefits is the very high proportion of affordable units in this scheme, higher than the applicant had been obliged to include. So I don't know if that's something that might influence members when they come to think about weighing up those benefits. But it is quite a commitment to affordable.
Thank you. Any other points of view or comments, because we are getting near to taking a vote on this now, I think. I can't see any new hands going up, so I'm going to refer to where we are. I have to say I'm finding this very difficult between the harm, which is heritage, and the need, which is accommodation, to balance, but there is a lot of information regarding heritage. There's also, we've heard a lot about the need of the area. But members, we are where we are with this now. We have had a proposal put on the table. It has been seconded to accept the officer's recommendation that is in front of you on your papers. This has been proposed by, you have to remind me who, Rob?
It was proposed by Councillor Plum.
Councillor Plum, and seconded by Councillor Parker, that we follow the officer's recommendation for refusal. So I'm now going to put that, and I'm going to ask you, Officer Robert Carmichael, to do the roll call.
Thank you, Chair. So if you could please respond with for, against, or abstain. So Councillor Sue Ayres.
Against.
Councillor Melanie Barrett.
Against.
Councillor Peter Beer.
For the recommendation.
Councillor David Busby.
Against.
Councillor Trevor Cresswell.
Against.
Councillor, are we still aware that John Hinton didn't join us in the end, just to confirm, Chair?
Correct.
Yep. Councillor Lee Jameson?
For.
Councillor Mary McLaren?
Against.
Councillor Adrian Osborne?
Against.
Councillor Lee Parker?
For.
And Councillor Stephen Plum?
For.
Thank you, Chair. I make that the motion was lost by 6 votes to 4. Could I just confirm, Mr. Dupre?
Yes, can you hear me? I'm here, hopefully. Yeah, yes, I counted with you, Mr. Carmichael. I got 4 votes for and 6 votes against. So we're in agreement, yes.
That motion is lost, Chair.
Thank you very much. Well, members, I now have to ask you whether you wish to go back and debate this more, or whether you're going to come forward with a proposal, another proposal.
Well, I've just noted, Chair, that Mr. Stroud has put his hand up. Do we want to go to him first in this
Yes.
case?
Okay, we will do.
Hello, members. Obviously, given what's just occurred, you've got an incredibly difficult task ahead of you now. I can only stress again that you need to be absolutely clear that in weighing this up, you are attaching considerable importance and weight to the finding of harm, and that you fully acknowledge that there is a presumption that you should refuse this application. There are benefits. If you feel that they are more compelling than the harm, that is fine. Clearly, we are.
I think, Mr. Stroud, sorry to interrupt you. I think members have voted to say that they find in favour of the benefits. So I think we ought to emphasise on that, because presumably they're going to come back with a proposal which will encounter these benefits. I think we've passed that harm side. That's got to be for something else to happen there.
Yeah, well, sort of, yes, Chair. I think that, but the problem we're in now is that members are going to have to give reasons very clearly. That there is, noting obviously the history here, there was a set of reasons put forward at the end of the report to at the very least promote debate and get members to think about what it is they're doing. But regardless, they are going to have to articulate very clearly why it is they're approving the scheme, whether they accept those reasons, whether they're putting forward different reasons. If there are different reasons, if, for example, they feel that there is no harm, I really would feel that potentially a deferral or pausing for a significant period of time will be required for us to get the reasons absolutely spot on. I don't mean to unsettle members, but given the history, we are in a litigious context, and that, you know, the next steps here, you need to be absolutely clear and careful in terms of what you're doing. Thanks, Chair.
I understand where you're coming from, Mr. Stroud, and you're obviously trying to protect everybody here, which is right and proper. Members, I did say that we'd take a comfort break after this, but I think that might be a good idea to take a deferment at this moment, just to have a comfort break and come back. That would give the officers, the legal people, time to have a chat, and it might be more helpful, because I haven't had a proposal from anybody to say that we're going to move in favour of this development, and give you time to think of your reasons as well. Do you think this is a sensible way forward, officers and legal?
Sorry, can I just come in on that before we do that?
Yep.
Could I just ask Stephen, whereabouts in the report was the previous decision? I can't lay my hands on it, because I think that would be a good starting point.
I think we did mention.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. The reasoning given is set out in the introduction. That's from the minutes of the last meeting. Frankly, though, members, I would consider that to be deficient. You need to very clearly, first and foremost, state whether there is a compliance with the plan as a whole, or whether this is in conflict with the plan as a whole. Also move through then, and clearly, given the heritage context, you need to identify the harm, and indeed noting guidance how much harm, presuming it's within the less than substantial bracket.
Well,
then
can we
undertake
take an adjournment then, and we'll get the legal officer's comments before we go.
Indeed, if I may, Chairman, I'll just say now that I do strongly agree with Mr. Stroud. I do be saying exactly the same myself. But yes, I agree. The adjournment might, the short break, which we have anyway, would be a good idea.
Are you happy with that, Stephen? Yep.
Yeah, but just to signpost to Councillor Busby, though,
yep,
that from paragraph 325 onwards,
325,
there is a, for want of a better term, there is a template which sets out the procedure that he might wish to follow.
Page 113.
So I would strongly recommend that he consider paragraphs 325 to 329, and then the statement of reasons set out.
Okay.
And whether he endorses those or puts forward something different, it doesn't really matter in that sense. The key is that he understands the very clear route map of taking a decision here. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to suggest a adjournment to have a comfort break, and would you all be back for 12 o'clock? So you've got about 10 minutes. Is that all okay, Mr. Legal?
Yes, Chairman. I agree.
Okay, then,
I'll
members.
pause the live stream, Chair.
Thank you very much, and all be back for 12 o'clock. Thank you.
Right, Chair, we are now back live.
Well done. Thank you. Right, members. Now we are in a situation where we have just gone against the officer's advice on the last planning application. I'll ask the legal advisor to bring us up to date. Ian.
Yes. Hello again. Well, we've obviously we've had a proposal to refuse in accordance with the officer's recommendation that has been, that resolution failed by 4 votes to 6. So we now have to decide that's so there's no authority to refuse, but the committee must now decide what to do, as in whether there will be a proposal to grant permission contrary to the recommendation or to take some alternative action. And I think just before we went off air for a break, Mr. Stroud gave some advice which I strongly endorse to the members who were in the majority. And so unless I don't think Mr. Stroud and I have anything more we can usefully say, but if we see if there is a further proposal to come forward.
Right, members. You've heard that advice. I now need a proposal for something from you with reasons. So who would like to start? Councillor Busby.
Okay, I mean, I think that the paragraph that we've got on page 119, at the top of page 119, which was the outcome from the previous meeting, is a good starting point.
Right.
It might need perhaps beefing up somewhere, but from my point of view, I'd say that whilst recognising that there will be undoubted harm to the rear view of the cottages and the connectivity of the cottages to the fields, the benefit to the village of providing a small number of affordable and market housing outweighs this harm, especially as there are no alternative sites. The future viability of the village must be considered more important than the likely harm caused to the heritage aspects. I think then you lead into that proposal. I don't know whether Stephen thinks that's good enough or not. Okay.
Stephen, can you help on that?
Yeah, unfortunately, probably not, Councillor Busby. The reason being that the first port of call is to consider the development plan. There is a breach of policy CS2 for the reasons set out in the report. Non-compliance with CS2 is likely to mean non-compliance with the plan as a whole, which means then you look to other material considerations to see whether they support that view, that there should be a refusal contrary to the plan, or indeed that they might indicate some other decision other than in accordance with the plan might be taken. From what you were suggesting, it seems to be that there was a tallying with the statement of reasons at the end of the report, save for the addition of you stating that there are no other available sites. So, and the reason I direct you back to the statement of reasons is because this is felt to take you on a particular journey, which is the type of route that you need to take in order to make a legitimate decision. And by which I mean, start with the development plan. Does it comply with the development plan as a whole? Certainly, given the fact that there is heritage harm involved, your statutory duties are engaged. You're advised to undertake the public harm balance as set out in the MPPF. It's going to be very difficult for us to do this on the hoof, is what I'm trying to say. And I would prefer, if you're not going to go with the statement of reasons, but with an addition that there's no other available site, I would suggest that we defer, frankly, because I think it's going to be incredibly difficult for us to sit here and stitch something together.
Yeah, if I may come in, Chairman, I'm agreeing again. I know I seem to be making a habit of agreeing with Mr. Stroud, but I often tell him he should have been a lawyer. So, he's quite right. I think we all recognise in the way local government works, the way in particular that significant planning decisions work, is that officers give advice and make recommendations, but elected members make a decision. And we always want to respect that fundamental principle of democracy. But our job today, in particular, in light of the history of this, is to assist you by trying to make sure that the decision that you may make is one that is legally sound and that will we hope survive any challenge made against it. And I think for the reasons Stephen has said, that that would be a wise course of action. I'm not usually very keen on recommending adjournments and postponements beyond the day, but I do agree here.
Councillor Busby,
yeah, I mean, I'm happy to go with the statement of reasons. Can't argue with anything in there. And as Stephen said, I think perhaps with the addition that there are no alternative sites available, and maybe put something in about the viability of the village.
Yeah, that did come up quite a bit in the debate, the viability and the need for these homes. So can you make anything on that to add in?
Well, Chair, that has been accounted for in Roman 4 of the Statement of Reasons, where it says the provision of housing in the context of there being a proven local need is a compelling benefit. Does that accord with your thinking, Councillor Busby?
Yes, very much so.
So you'd like to go along with that and propose that? Is that what you're saying, Councillor Busby?
I am, Chair, yes, and I do. So
can you spell it out to us so that we're all clear what you're proposing, and then I'll sit as a seconder?
Well, I'm proposing that we adopt the Statement of Reasons as spelled out in the report, and therefore propose that as it says in 12, the Chief Planning Officer is able to grant planning permission, subject to the
What page are you on for that part?
115.
Oh yes, that's over the page.
Little 12.
Yeah. Sorry, I've gone 2 pages. Yeah.
Would it be useful, Chair, if I read out those reasons for the avoidance of doubt?
Yes, I think that would be very good. And then if you want to challenge any of them, just wave at us and I'll stop Stephen. Okay.
So the application proposes development on land that is historically undeveloped, irreversibly fragmenting land that forms the historic curtilage of the Grade 2 star listed buildings known as 1 to 6 the Street and is within the Kersey Conservation Area. The proposed development would introduce new building that would separate the historic buildings from their historic curtilage and from the wider landscape beyond. Though the urbanisation of an area that has historically remained substantially undeveloped, through the urbanisation of an area that has historically remained substantially undeveloped, the link between the buildings and the wider rural landscape beyond would be permanently severed, and the ability to understand that historic relationship would be compromised. This amounts to harm to both the listed buildings and the conservation area, as there would be a diminution of significance as a result of those impacts. The harm would be less than substantial within the meaning provided by the NPPF. The harm is serious and requires clear and convincing justification. It must attract considerable importance in any balancing exercise. In accordance with the NPPF Power 196, the less than substantial harm to those designated heritage assets has been weighed against the public benefits of the development. The public benefits presented by the development are as follows. Housing. Of itself, this relates to a basic need and poses inherent social and economic benefits, and that's through construction and occupation. Space standards. All dwellings would exceed NDSS, that's the nationally described space standard, with dedicated garden space, which is considered to be a social benefit, ensuring quality of life for occupants. Efficiency. All dwellings would be highly efficient, which poses economic benefits and obvious environmental benefit in the context of the council having declared a climate emergency. Affordability, local need. The provision of 4-number affordable units and 3-number rental units where there is a proven need. This is considered to be a benefit of itself, separate to the general benefits associated with housing per se. The general housing space standards and efficiency benefits are of themselves significant. The provision of housing in the context of there being a proven local need is a compelling benefit. Where the provision of 4 number units for local connection affordable housing with 3 number further 2-bedroom units for market rent would contribute to meeting those needs, members afford that contribution considerable weight. Benefits related to council tax and the New Homes Bonus have not been afforded any material weight. Any SIL benefit attracts only a limited weight. Notwithstanding the findings of harm to the significance of designated heritage assets, including to particularly important buildings of more than special interest, and the strong presumption against the grant of planning permission in such circumstances, it still remains possible for other considerations to be even more weighty. In the circumstances of this application, it is judged that the heritage harms, while notably serious and clearly appreciable, do not outweigh the particularly strong and compelling benefits identified above. Members fully acknowledge that the presumption should be to refuse planning permission in the face of such harm. However, the outcome of the balancing exercise set out under NPPF Power 196 is that the public benefits do outweigh the harms identified, whether taken individually or by asset altogether. Even in the event that harm had been identified in relation to the Bell Inn, which realistically could only be at a low level of less than substantial harm, the outcomes of the Power 196 balance remain the same. The application therefore accords with the heritage policies of the NPPF and policies CN06, CN08, CS11 and CS15 of the development plan. While compliance with policy CS11 weighs in favour of a grant of permission, it cannot override the requirement to satisfy policy CS2. Though it has been demonstrated that there is a proven need for the development, the circumstances of the application and proposed development remain unexceptional, contrary to policy. Adopting a cautious stance, the application is considered to conflict with the development plan taken as a whole. However, it is considered that there are other material considerations which indicate that planning permission should be granted, and such considerations outweigh the harm reflected in the breach of the development plan identified above, not least the broader compliance with the development plan in all other respects. Those other considerations also include the NPPF, where the proposed development would comply with its policies taken as a whole. As noted, the public benefits to flow from the development, including an identified need for housing locally, are compelling and outweigh the heritage harms identified. Further, where the application conflicts with policy CS2, it does so only in respect of an element of that policy which is considered to be out of date, and where that policy is afforded less weight on account of the absence of an allocations document and settlement boundaries review. In light of the above, the benefits of allowing the development to proceed outweigh the harms, brackets conflict with the development plan as a whole, the listed buildings, the conservation area, and planning permission should be granted at variance to the direction of the development plan. And therefore, the planning committee resolves to delegate to the chief planning officer to grant permission subject to the prior completion of a legal agreement pursuant to section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 to secure the provision of affordable housing, that's the 4 number affordable rent units, on the terms recommended by the strategic housing manager, and that the grant of planning permission should be subject to planning conditions drafted to the satisfaction of the chief planning officer, but including the following matters: standard time limit, that the development where applicable shall accord with the approved plans, the requirement for a detailed hard and soft landscaping plan, including boundary treatments, noise mitigation measures, proposed site and finished floor levels, external facing and roofing materials, that's the agreement of, control of lighting and the agreement of, the implementation of the ecology measures and adherence to the recommendations in the ecology report and its addendum, arboricultural measures, including the protection of the beech tree at the old gardens, archaeology, that's investigation and assessment recording, those recommended by the local highway authority, including bin and cycle storage, that the EPC to be rated as the energy performance certificate given at the end on completion will be at least D, and there will be evidence adduced at key build stages to ensure that that is on track, fire hydrants and a construction management plan. Thank you, Chair. Sorry for the length.
And no, thank you very much, because I know it has to be very difficult for you to come up with all that. I will ask Robert Carmichael if he can make that statement of what you've just read out available to all members in due course, because I think that'd be quite useful. I did start to write some of it down, but obviously it wasn't possible. But I see 2 hands, Julie Abbott-Taylor and Robert Carmichael. I'll take Robert Carmichael first, followed by Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, and this is apologies for any confusion here on my part, but obviously Mr. Dupre and Mr. Stroud talked about deferral. Is Councillor Busby's proposal still for approval?
I think it is.
Yes,
but I'll
I just
check.
wanted to clarify that before we went any further, Chair.
Right.
And going back to your point there, Chair, also about the statement, of course, that unfortunately I can't write quite as fast as Mr.
No, that'll be
that'll be recorded, obviously, from.
Well, it's at the very end of the report from para 329 onwards.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. Councillor Busby, could you just come in and say that you wish to continue or not, that it was a proposal you intended to proceed with? Now you've heard all that.
Yes, I do wish to carry on with
okay,
that.
Robert Carmichael, you're happy with that?
Yes, Chair. Just need a seconder, sorry, once we've gone through the machinations.
Yeah, I thought I saw another hand, but it's gone. Right. So it's been proposed by Councillor Busby, that statement that was read out on his behalf, for the reasons for approving the application. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Barrett, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I'd like to second that proposal, please.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any comments to make?
Chairman, it's Ian here. Dupre, you did say that you thought Julie Abbey Taylor's hand was up. I don't know if that was a mistake or not. Can we just check with Julie that she didn't want to come in?
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's who it was. Yes.
Yes, thanks, Chair. No, I think it was left from previous. My apologies.
Right. Okay, thank you. Some appear and most of them don't, but yours did appear. Right, there's no hands shown. So I'm assuming then that members are ready to go to the vote. So there's no way I can read out all that, but the proposal has been put by Councillor Busby. You've heard it read out, and it's been seconded by Councillor Barrett. All those in favour of recommending approval, subject to all what was read out and the conditions, please indicate after the officer calls your name for, against or abstain. Councillor...
sorry, Chair,
Rob.
like Lee Parker had his hand up.
Has he? Oh, sorry. Councillor Parker?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Yeah, apologies, Chair. I just want to be absolutely clear that everybody understands what this proposal is for. I just want clarification that everybody realises that they're voting to go against officer recommendation and to approve this application.
Well, I think that is clear because they threw out the recommendation for previous. So, but members, you are all clear. Anybody who's not, please indicate.
I think, Chair, that we do recognise that this is a very marginal decision. It is a very tough decision, and I guess you could argue either way. But as we say, it's a decision made on balance, and people will put their own spin on the balances, the pluses and minuses of each side. We do recognise the importance of it. We don't make this decision lightly.
No, thank you. Ian, did you want to have the final say? Legal? No,
thank you, Chairman.
It just appeared on the screen. Thank you.
Sorry, that was a mistake by me.
Okay. Right, members. I'm now going to ask Robert Carmichael, the officer, to do the roll call. Robert?
Thank you, Chair. So I will now read out the councillors' names. If you could please vote by saying for, against or abstain. So Councillor Sue Ayres.
For.
Councillor Melanie Barrett.
For.
Councillor Peter Beer.
For.
Councillor David Busby.
For.
Councillor Trevor Cresswell.
For.
Councillor Lee Jameson.
Against.
Councillor Mary McLaren.
For.
Councillor Adrian Osborne.
For.
Councillor Lee Parker.
Against?
And Councillor Stephen Plum.
Against.
Thank you, Chair. I make that 7 votes to 3. The vote carried. Mr. Dupre, can you please confirm?
Yes, I agree exactly right. Carried by 7 votes to 3.
Thank you. Then that is carried by 7 votes to 3. That has got approval. We'll now move on, members. We've still got a little way to go. I think we have now present Councillor John Hinton in attendance, and I think one of the ward members, Sue Carpendale, has also joined us. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm here, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Sue Carpendale? Yep.
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, Rob. Oh no, sorry.
Sorry, Chair, if I might just interlude very quickly, as Councillor Hinton has just joined, could we just check that Councillor Hinton doesn't have any declarations to make, or any notifications of site visits?
Yeah. Councillor Hinton?
No, no, and no.
No. Right, thank you. We'll take that.
Sorry, Chair, I ought to have declared really that for this application I live, well, I don't know, 150 yards away. So I don't know whether that makes any difference or not, but
I wouldn't have thought so, but I'll ask legal to comment.
No, it's if the member, Councillor Busby, obviously doesn't have any pecuniary interest, and really it does sound to me, unless you really have some worry or concern that if it's granted, it's going to affect your interest in some way. But you obviously, I'm sure, as an experienced member, you know that, and you would have said so before now. And you're just remembering now that you ought to say you happen to be near. But that's all there is to it. So, if that's the case, I'm sure we can go forward.
I was going to say, Chair, from reviewing when this application came to us last time in February, I believe, Councillor Busby did declare the same thing, and did also declare that it didn't influence his interest, his decision making in this. So we are in line with what we did before.
Thank you. We'll now move on to land east of Longfield Road and Little Tufts, Capel St Mary, and the case officer is forgotten, Bradley Huffer, I think. Yep. Over to you, Bradley.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can't see you yet.
Yeah. I'm just saying I need to speak to Rob quickly because unfortunately I can't share my screen. It's greyed out.
Right, I can't help you there.
That does sound like a pickle. Let's see what we can do about that.
I'm in the attendees list as an attendee rather than a presenter for some reason.
Hold on, let me sort that out. I can do that. Where are you? Right. Try it now.
I think it's come up, yeah.
Apologies, Chair. That was my fault for moving Mr. Heffer into the wrong area.
That's fine.
Can everyone see my
screen.
desktop now?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, members, ladies and gentlemen. This application relates to a proposal for a reserve matters submission for a development at land east of Longfield Road and Little Tufts in Capel St Mary. Members will recall that the application was initially considered at the Planning Committee meeting on the 25th of February, and at that meeting the application was deferred by members in order that 3 points could be addressed. Firstly, to seek improvements to the design of the flats. Secondly, to alter mix towards a lower number of bedrooms, and thirdly, increase the number of bungalows. This is an aerial view of the site showing the position in relation to the existing settlement and the wider rural agricultural land, mainly to the north. Also, members will note the A12 connecting Colchester and Ipswich to the right-hand side of your screen. The constraints map identified the constraints. You'll be able to note, and hopefully you can see my pointer, where the built-up area boundary lies. And this is adjacent to the built-up area boundary along that side of the edge of Capel, and there's another section of built-up area boundary enclosing the dwellings along London Road. You also note there's some groups of TPO trees, but they're not impacted by this proposed development. This is a site location plan I think is useful because obviously that shows the red line site in relation to the context of, perhaps you can see the surrounding development, which is a bit clearer. This, for information, is the previous scheme that went to committee, and you'll note that I think the elements that you were concerned about previously would be, will hopefully addressed in the next scheme. I'm not expecting you to play spot the ball and notice the difference here, because my next slide identifies particular areas of change. So I think it'd be useful if I just run through these quickly just to identify exactly what's happened. Under point 1, the buffer between plots 8 and 17 has been increased, and this moves units away from the western boundary. It was previously 3 metres, it's now up to 8. Area 2, that group of 3 houses that sit under that number 2, they have been changed to 2-bed properties instead of 3. Area 3 on that plan indicates a drying area which has now been proposed for the flatted block. Area 4, there's a bungalow at the bottom of that that area there, which is shown, which is replacing a dwelling. So there's an introduction of a bungalow there. Area 5, there was a long terrace of properties along here. You may recall an unrelieved terrace. That's now been broken up into smaller units, and that's had the consequence of breaking up the adjacent parking area as well, which in street steam terms looks a lot better, we think. Area 6, there's another 2 bungalows gone in here in lieu of the previous houses. So that one, and that one, those 3 units are now single story. Area 7 has been replanned, so we have maisonettes along here and a new drying area, and 2 dwellings have changed their orientation, but that's had the effect of creating a larger area of public open space with a route through, as you can see. So that's been made wider. Area 8, the line of the road has been slightly relocated this way to the west, so that area of housing is looser, and also the presentation of housing along that boundary is better into relation of the open space. And 9, this area here, which is part of the SUDS treatment for the site, does now include, well, that's clearly fenced off from the remainder, because I think the safety aspect of that was a concern, although not a minuted thing that was raised at the previous meeting. So that's a summary of the changes that you've been asked to consider. I think it's important to note that that doesn't just pick up on the 3 elements that members identified at the previous committee. Clearly, you know, there's other changes that have happened as a result. This affordable housing layout on slide 8 indicates the housing for affordable rent, which is shown pink and includes the flatted block, you will note, and the shared ownership units, which are shown in green. Story heights, the key again, the majority of the units are at 2 stories. The yellow ones are single story units. There's 3 examples of 2.5 story units, which are basically rooms in the roof, which would be lit by dormers on those properties. And there's a single example of this 3-story unit, which is the flatted block. Housing site layout plan, which again, I think would be useful. The yellow are single bed units, green 2-bed units, pink 3-bed units, and the aqua blue as I've called them, are 4-bed units. So there's a mix of units across the site. The architecture, as I said in my previous presentation, follows a very traditional form of vernacular architecture, but I think the inclusion of this this slide gives you an idea of the street scenes and how they will work, particularly in relation to the open space area to the top, and also the open space area when you first come into the site, and you get a feel there for the scale of the flatted development against the adjacent houses. This slide has been produced subsequent to the original meeting, which again hopefully gives members more of a feel for the scale. Street scene A, which is on the left hand side, this one here, and street scene B, which again gives you an idea of the scale of that 3-storey unit against the 2. I'll go through these reasonably swiftly because I think you've seen these all previously. As I said, it's all fairly traditional vernacular design. There's certainly been a lot of discussion with the applicant about how these look, and trying to make them as traditional formed as possible, bearing in mind their location on the edge of a village. The key one I'd like to get to is this. I know there was disappointment generally when members saw this elevation because they couldn't really, understand the scale of it in relation to a 2-storey view. So I think that was fully appreciated. And what we've asked the developer to do is create a CGI in relation to that specific building. And as you can see, it is relieved. By that I mean that it's not seen in its entirety as one whole block. It does return round the corners, and there's a projection at the front, so it's broken up visually, which I think is useful. Lastly, a pumping station, just to allay fears about what that would look like. Above ground, it's an enclosure with a wall. All the apparatus is underground, and the substation is a fairly straightforward pyramidal roof block. Again, you've seen these before, but I've added them again. This is the views across the open space from the north, which I think is quite a pleasant edge to this new part of the village. And this is a view across the public open space as you come in from Little Tufts. So again, and you'll also note in that corner there, you can see the 3-storey block by way of context. I'll finish with some slides just to give you a context of the surroundings, which, I mean, there is an example of 1.5-storey chalet, but it is mainly 2-storey development in a vicinity. I would estimate this was built in the 60s or 70s. This is the view coming through from Little Tufts, and where you see that caravan is basically where the agreed access would go through to the site. And that's a closer up view of that. This is coming from the footpath from the south and basically is a broad sweep round the site. That's the edge of Boundary Oaks development, which is a newer development which has been approved. And then there's a sweep round the site, and there you see the edge of the existing buildings, Little Tufts and Great Tufts. So it is, as well, as I've said in the report, clearly the principle of residential development has been accepted on this site, and it's been supported, and now we're dealing with the details. I think just finally, as part of my report or my presentation, I'll just draw your attention to the comments on the late papers in relation to density, which was clarified as being lower than what is said in my original report, and various consultee responses that we've received, and also the comments of the parish council, which clearly are still in objection to the proposal. And I think that that's about as much as I need to say at this point, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. I'll see if there's any points of clarification. I've just got one, because reading the papers and seeing the emails that are backwards and forwards, there was an objector, which will come up later, so I don't want to go into that, but can you show us where plot 8 is in relation to that objector? That might just be helpful when that comes up eventually, if that comes.
Yes, I will do.
I was trying to follow it through your plans, but I wasn't sure which side.
I'll get a drawing up that shows. Yeah, I don't know if this will work, but I'll try and do this.
Oh, just zoomed in. Yeah,
expanded a bit.
Yes.
That's number 8, Penclose, and I think that the owner of that is going to speak shortly. And these are the units in relation to Penclose.
So where is that plot 8 where your arrow is?
That is, yes, that is.
That's fine. That's all I need to know. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Members, have you any points of clarification to the planning officer? No. Thank you. Right, we'll move on. Public speakers. We now have the parish representative. Wait a minute, have I got the right one here? Yes. It's Brian Rogers to speak. You, sir, have 3 minutes in which to address the committee, and I'll see if there's any questions for you afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Over to you when you're ready.
Right, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you and I can see you.
Right, I shall start then. Capel St Mary expanded hugely in the 1970s, but with a planned road layout of cul-de-sacs off 2 arterial roads. 100% off-street parking, front and rear gardens and garages. Most houses had space for modest extensions to accommodate growing families. It was recognised by the EU as a model garden village. The Persimmons development, as planned, is completely out of keeping with the rest of the village. I would point out now that the only downside to Capel is a single main access to the A12 dual carriageway via an underpass. More of that later. Rather than choosing to build fewer than 100 houses permitted, a density of 32.9 dph has been achieved by, in our view, reducing usable public open space. There are still too few bungalows, an express need in our neighbourhood plan, and we still have concerns about the open suds. Unlike the rest of Capel, most houses will have no front gardens, facing directly onto communal parking areas. Visitors parking, except for the larger houses on private roads, will prove difficult, and tandem parking arrangements will cause problems for people leaving at different times. We have concerns regarding refuse provision and collection. Bins will be stored some distance from houses, requiring movement to the mouths of parking areas and private roads. Inevitably, as a combination of working hours and human nature, bins will be left out by the roadside for long periods. Should families in non-private roads have adult children with cars, there will be more vehicles than designated parking slots, inevitably using up visitor slots and in time overspilling onto the side of roads. There appears to be little or no disabled parking. The 3-storey apartment block is completely out of keeping with the rest of the development and with the village. There are no buildings of this type in Capel. We understand that roads will not be adopted, nor will there be adequate street lighting. Again, a total variance with the rest of the village. While vehicular access via a small cul-de-sac has planning permission, this ignores the reality that residents will have massive problems at key times exiting into Longfield Road, then into Thorney Road, an arterial road, only 100 metres from the junction with the street, the main road through Capel. Thorney Road traffic has to give way to street traffic. Traffic through Little Tufts can only proceed if Longfield Road and then Thorney Road traffic gives way. The addition of some 100 cars trying to exit the village via the underpass approach at busy times will cause massive congestion. This is not a sustainable quality development. It is a case of trying to squeeze a quart into a pint pot. Why here? As stated by a district council at a public meeting with James Cartledge MP in 2019, because of Capel's proximity to the A12, a road declared unfit for purpose by Highways England, with traffic backing up from Copdock interchange to Capel at peak times. Too many houses in the wrong place. Please refuse this application. Or rather, change it.
Thank you. Members, have you any questions to the parish representative? No? Okay, thank you very much. Right, we'll move on. We have an objector, Robert Child, to speak. You, sir, have 3 minutes in which to address the committee. At the end of that, I'll see if there's any questions for you. Perhaps, Mr. Rogers, you can turn your camera off. Thank you. And your mic.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we cannot see you. Camera?
The camera's on. Can you see me?
No, still.
Okay. So the camera's switched on the
We've got Ian up for some reason.
I was going to say, Chair, if Mr. Child can't get it, it isn't necessary for him to give his 3 minutes if he is happy to do without.
Right.
I can do it without the video.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Carry on.
I would like to object to the approval of the application. Plot 8 is positioned in such a way that there is line of sight into my autistic son's ground floor bedroom and wet room window, which is a disabled adaptation, and his calm and private sanctuary. It has greatly improved the quality of his life. He is a young man, aged 22, and has an assigned social worker. He was under the care of Great Ormond Street for his severe epilepsy, which is now largely controlled. We believe that there will be line of sight to his window at an angle of view that will make it possible to see into the rooms from one building to the other, and this includes ground and first floor. If the boundary treatment is not properly addressed, all visitors will at some point be facing directly into his accommodation from less than 20 feet. He spends most of his time in his room, and the nearest viewable windows are distant at 80 feet. We are considering some extra screening between ours and opposite. It will be unbearable for us if Plot 8 is built in the currently proposed position. Without proper screening, he will not enjoy the freedom that he currently does. This will be a loss of amenity. He should not have to live behind obscured glass or blinds because others have failed to protect his interests. This will liken his environment to that of a prison. He often has periods of self-directed behaviour, which includes rocking, flapping and shaking, which is part of his regime when he is not engaged. He has little social awareness and has no inhibitions when he is in his home environment. To allow others to view him would violate his dignity. I would ask for legal clarification that the application meets the obligations of Article 8, the Human Rights Act. Specifically, you must be acting in accordance with the law, and there must be no less intrusive way of achieving your objective. His accommodation was adapted by Babergh and Suffolk County Council at a cost of £20,000. It is widely accepted that autistic people are extremely sensitive to changes of environment. If we have to ensure that people approaching or leaving Plot 8 cannot view or incidentally view his accommodation, it will make it very different. We will have to ensure that his blinds are closed at all times when he is present, which is guaranteed to cause severe anxiety. In fact, he will not allow others to make adjustments to the area, such as touching the blinds can lead to periods of extreme unhappiness and disquiet. I respectfully ask if the committee will accept any future legal ramifications caused by the approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll see if there's any questions. I've got one, but I think before I go to questions, I'm just going to ask our legal advisor regarding Article 8. I don't know if you need time to look at this, but Ian, he's referred to Article 8.
Well, Chairman, I think it's those of us in the planning system have become used to over the years. I'm sure my planning officer colleagues have been mindful. I mean, yes, indeed, Article 8 is the right to your home, and I'm relying on my memory. I've got the textbook in the bookcase. Article 8 is home, private and family life. I may not have got that exactly right, but I'm sure you get the drift.
Right, okay.
Yeah, when you're making planning decisions, that you must give appropriate weight to it. Well, obviously our planning law system in this country deals with that by dealing with the concept of residential amenity. I mean,
excuse me, can you hear me still?
Yes.
No, hold on. Let my legal advisor to finish. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to if Mr. Chair wanted to ask me something, but yeah, it's though of course I'm giving legal advice to the committee specifically. Yeah, I think it's always said. I mean, when I did human rights at university, when I went back to do it as a higher part of a higher degree, we were being told very firmly that the only absolute rights under human rights law are the right to life, which is one of the earlier articles. I'd have to look to remind myself which one it is, and the right against torture. That the other rights are all relative in the sense that they must be given due weight balance in a decision-making process, whether that is planning or another aspect of public and administrative law. I'd also, I mean, of course, I'm sure colleagues are aware the Disability Discrimination Act has some relevance here too, and that will be something that members are all mindful of. I mean, the legal duty of the committee is to hear what has been said and to give it appropriate weight as they see fit, having heard what you've heard. I mean, I suppose if we were looking at we're looking at the effect of a development on what is there already. So yes, that I'm sure you will bear that in mind. But that's, I mean, I'll get the textbook if you want me to go into any more detail. Well, hope that's helpful for the time being. I'm sure that's helped us, but you can read up on it if you want while we're carrying on. My question to the public speaker, I would assume, and we'll find this out a little bit later, that there will be adequate landscape and proposed around the boundaries, but what would be acceptable from your point of view if you didn't want hedging? Would a wooden fence be okay, or what is your view on that?
Certainly, sir. Thank you for that. We would accept a form of substantial fence. But I do note from the boundary of the site that the existing hedge actually does fall on our side of the boundary. And I have actually spoken to Stuart McAdam previous to this meeting, and he has been very helpful. I just would like to make sure that the correspondence that we've had is actually implemented and enshrined in what you're doing today, and that would help. If it was composite, it would help so much, because it would give us a better buffer between us and the existing development, although it still wouldn't obscure any view from upstairs. No. That happens in any household. If you go upstairs and look over, you can most likely see your neighbour's bottom of their garden. It's just a bit of a problem with Lewis being that close and being a disabled adaptation. Commented on all that. We are aware. Okay, thank you. All I can say to you is that we have to deal with the plans in front of us, but I can assure you that when the applicant comes up, I may pose a question to him. Anyway, members, Councillor Busby.
Thank you, Chair. Just a suggestion, really. Plots 7 and 8 are both houses. If they were replaced by a single bungalow, surely that would help alleviate the problems. I noticed that plot 17 and 16 behind it are bungalows, so it would be in keeping. Is that your question to the applicant? Whether that would make a difference to them, yeah. Right. Well, I think I have to respectively. I think I have to respectively remind the speaker that we are dealing with the plans that are in front of us. If he wants to comment on what he thinks might look better, then please do so. But it was rather an unusual question, Councillor Busby. But Mr. I propose to ask the applicant that as well. Good. That's fine. Mr. Child, have you any comment on that? No, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions, members, to him? No. Thank you very much. We'll then move on, and there's no one wanting to speak there. We'll now go to the applicant, which is Stuart McAdam. You, sir, have 3 minutes also in which to address the committee. If you like to turn on your camera and turn on your mic, and then you can start. Good morning. Morning. Afternoon. Yeah, good afternoon, I should say. Can everyone hear me before I start? We can see and hear you. Yeah, thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of the Planning Committee. My name is Stuart McAdam, and I'm the Planning Manager with Persimmon Homes Suffolk. Members are being asked to consider Persimmon Homes' application, which seeks approval of reserve matters for a development of 100 houses at land adjacent to Little Tufts, Capel St Mary. The principle, including highway impact and access, has been established by the outline planning permission approved by your committee in July 2018. Following the deferral by the committee earlier this year,
Further discussions have taken place with your officers, the local ward member and Capel St Mary Parish Council, resulting in the proposals before members today. The reasons for deferral as highlighted in the council minutes were to seek improvement of the design of the flats, alter the mix towards a lower number of bedrooms and to increase the number of bungalows. In respect of flats, we considered reducing the height to 2.5 or 2-storey. However, this impacted on viability and also compromised the affordable housing offer, which has been agreed with your housing officer. The 3-storey element, whilst acknowledged as not commonplace in Capel St Mary, is considered to be an acceptable form of building which adds visual interest and provides a key focal point in the centre of the development, which will not readily be viewed from outside the site. Street images have been provided and computer-generated images commissioned to give members an impression of what the building will look like, and the design is very similar to flats approved by the committee in Hadley in August last year. Members will be pleased to know that concerns made about the lack of an external drying area have been addressed with the provision of an enclosed external drying area to the rear. The remaining concerns of the committee centre around the housing mix, in particular seeking to increase the number of 2-bedroom dwellings and increasing the number of bungalows within the development. Your previous and revised mix is highlighted in paragraph 12.8 of your report. I'm pleased to report the number of 2-bed units has increased from 28 to 34, which includes 3 additional private 2-bed bungalows. During discussions with the parish council following the committee, a request for additional 2-bed units along with smaller rather than large bungalows was something they were keen to see in Capel St Mary, as this would better reflect local housing requirements. The additional bungalows have been positioned to the southern part of the site to allow for a lower edge of the development adjacent to the footpath that runs through the expanded public open space. This means that the 42% of the units are now 1 to 3 bed in size and 68% are 2 to 3 bed dwellings. The houses will be built to modern sustainability standards and parking accords with Suffolk County Council's adopted parking standards, 228 spaces plus 26 visitor spaces. And you'll note from your papers that no objection has been received from Highway in this regard. The objections from the Parish Council and third parties are noted. However, we believe that the revised proposals provide a balanced mix of housing at an appropriate density for this location, whilst also providing 28% of the site area as public open space. That's nearly 3 times the policy requirement of 10%. An area of play is designated in the open space to the north, and Persimmon is happy to accept a condition to secure appropriate play equipment as necessary. Members will note from the papers there are no other objections to the proposals from statutory consultees. We've worked with your officers to ensure that development will make an attractive addition to the village, and we welcome the positive officer recommendation and hope that members can approve the application, which will deliver much needed high quality homes. Thank you for allowing me to address you this afternoon.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. McAdam. Yes, we are dealing with reserved matters, and I do note that you've have answered some of the queries we've got, or all of them. Could I just put it to you? You heard an objector. Hello, you've disappeared.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry.
Heard an objector who lives near plot 8, and we've been shown where that is, who has a lack of hedging. It's on his side, and obviously he can infill on that, but we all know that will take time to grow. He would be quite happy, from the sounds of what he was saying, if you put up a wooden fence along there. Surely that would be a small price to pay, but rather than us have to go into putting in conditions and what have you, what's your feeling on that?
Yeah, thank you for giving me the chance to respond to that. The issue only came up earlier this week when I was alerted to a potential problem. First thing to say is I don't believe that there's an issue of overlooking, and in planning terms that it would merit a reason for refusal, but that's for members to decide. But that being said, the angle of the house and the fact that it's at the end of the turning point for the Pen Close, which is adjacent, means that there's limited impact on neighbouring properties. but we hear what the objector has said in terms of his autistic son, and having met Mr. Child on site and given him assurance that we're perfectly happy to erect a fence, 1.8 metre fence, along that boundary, I'm hoping that that will set his concerns aside.
Thank you very much for that. Knowing your track record, Mr. McAdam, I think your word is good. So I'm happy, and hopefully the objector will be. But members, have you any questions? I can see a hand, but I don't know whose it is.
We've got Councillor Ayres,
right? Okay,
and then
yeah.
I can't. It's not showing who the other one is yet. I'll get
All
back
right,
to you.
Councillor Ayres, you carry on.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentation. I noted when the things that we were worried about on page 31, we had suggested that we didn't have private roads and that they were all adopted roads. What's happening about that?
Well, there's a bit of a hybrid approach to the scheme here. The adopted roads form the main routes through the site, but there will be private ways which will be conveyed over to residents when they purchase the property. It's fairly standard procedures in developments, and what it does is it makes the overall composition look a lot less engineered, and gives it a little bit less formal route through these private drives. So they would be maintained by the residents and conveyed to a number of them who are accessed off that private drive. So the adopted areas are the main routes, which will be taken over by the County Council.
And does that apply with lights? While we're on that point, so
if the roads to be adopted, and that's what we're proposing through the scheme, the adopted streets will be lit, but the private drives won't be lit.
Thank you. Any other? Did you find out who the other hand was?
Yes, it was Councillor Osborne, Chair.
Okay, right, Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions to Mr. McAdam. First of all, I notice you have turning heads in on these roads. Will that impact on people parking there? Because on other developments where you have turning heads, that's exactly what's happened. They've used the turning heads as parking spaces. And the other one was, I noticed the reference to the rear of the block of the three-storey house, that the entrance is at the back. Does that create a problem for? Has the police have made any inferences into antisocial behaviour or problems that arise from this? Please.
Yeah, just turning to the last point there about the access only from the rear. The police haven't made any comment on the access point to the rear. From our perspective and a practicality point of view, we did consider looking at putting a front door on the flats, and that was suggested by one of the members at the last committee. The reason we haven't included a front door is basically it involves configuring the whole of the internal layout for the flats, because they provide a communal stairwell which is located at the front of the flats. But also another point worth mentioning, and I think this is mentioned in your report, is that if there was a front door on the property, it could lead to deliveries being made, people bumping up on the front curb at that critical junction in the centre of the site, which has highway safety implications. So we have left it as was originally proposed, with the parking to the rear, which means that people can park at the rear door and walk straight into the apartment block. So the car park's at hand there for people to use, which is easier to use than walking round to the front door, and in some ways probably safer than that. Yeah.
Thank you.
And just going back to the first point you made about the turning points, no parking spaces are actually allocated within these turning points. And looking through the layout that you have before you, there's not an awful lot of scope to park in the turning heads themselves, because most of them either access the private drives or there's visitor spaces next to them anyway, so I don't foresee that as a problem. So there's, and the other thing to point out is that we're actually in excess of the parking requirements, which requires 25% parking throughout the scheme. We are actually in excess of that, providing 26 visitor parking spaces. So there should be ample provision within the development for visitors to park.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. I'd just like to, Peter, if I may, just thanks, Stuart, for the additional Swift boxes for the houses. It's very much welcome, and thank you, Stuart, for putting it on the conditions. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all. Welcome to. Pleased to do that.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Busby next.
Thank you, Stuart.
Hello.
Thank you for the
He's smiling, so you're going all right. Go on.
He doesn't want to be smiling.
No, I said you are smiling.
I'm always smiling.
Yeah. Thank you for the documents you sent out. I think we all found that was very useful, and I'd recommend, Robert, that you ask for that from any developer. I think it's useful. The point that I made, which you obviously heard about plots 7 and 8, which are alongside 8 Pen Close, we could resolve that problem by putting a single bungalow in there, which I think would help the number of bungalows, obviously, and I think it's always good to have single story buildings next door to the boundary. What are your views on that?
Yeah, thank you for your comments. We have considered that previously, but the site is, there's an outline permission in place for 100 units, and that is what we want to construct here. We don't want to cause problems with neighbours, and I believe that the layout as proposed doesn't cause any undue harm to the amenities enjoyed by any of the properties that bound the site. We've heard from Mr. Child earlier, and we've given an assurance that we're quite happy to erect a fence up there to maintain his privacy and enhance the quality of life for his son. I don't believe there's a planning reason for refusal on these grounds, and we're a business. We want to get houses built and comply with the standards of the permission that we have for 100 units. The other thing I would say in terms of density, we've got a good density here, and we also provide, I said in my speech earlier, 28% public open space within the site, which I think we've got an acceptable format here, and we wouldn't really seek to reduce the units here for no sound planning reasons. But again, that's something for members to consider, but considering the view of the members must look at the proposal before them.
Thank you.
So can I come back on that? Actually, you have planning approval for up to 100.
We do. You're absolutely right. And
that
we would
little
like
word makes quite a bit of difference.
We would like to build up to 100, and for the reasons I explained, the site.
You'd like to build 100.
Yes, we'd like to build 100.
And
I think you made your point on that one, Councillor Busby. Carry on.
He'll quote viability as a problem, but if we looked at the last set of results I got for Persimmon, they're averaging a profit of £61,000 per house.
Your question to him. The question. The viability, I haven't raised that because that isn't an issue for me. It's the planning merits of the scheme before members.
Okay, so it's not a viability issue then that you're putting in all these private drives. It's totally unreasonable to expect people to be forking out to keep the road surfaces good. I mean, especially where we've got affordable housing in here, these people can hardly afford a house, let alone repairing roads.
Can you help on that one? I
don't really have anything to add to what I've said already, except that we've put a proposal in which has to be assessed against its planning merits, and if members do find that unacceptable, then they will make their views known. But we believe we've got a site of 100 houses which we've got permission for up to 100, and it can accommodate the 100 within the site without causing amenity issues and meeting all the policy open space requirements.
Thank you.
And I guess the final point, or not quite the final point, if you look at your section, those round circle things, you've got item number 7, which is
I've got a plan in front of me.
Bottom right-hand corner of the layout. You've redesigned that layout, which provides more public open space, but it does then provide this block of parking, and the parking spaces are quite a long way from some of the properties. I have to say, I don't think that's necessarily an improvement.
Yeah, just to come back in that, it was a case of compromise here, I think, in that particular corner. What we were seeking to do was reduce the private road. I don't know if Bradley can bring up the previous arrangement, but there was a private road traversing that public open space area at the bottom in the south-east corner. Yeah. And by removing that and putting parking to the rear, we've opened up another area which provides meaningful open space, which we think is a benefit.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I can't really see that on my screen here. I don't have the other plan in front of me, but there was an element of courtyard parking on the previous layout, which you can see before you now to the rear of these mezzanines.
Can you move the pointer, Bradley, to where we're talking? Yes, that's that area.
Yeah, that's the parking court which was there previously.
Thank you.
What surface will the private roads take?
Take that screen off, please. Yeah.
What surface did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're generally a blacktop or sets of some pavers of some sort, but that will be agreed under the external work specification, which is conditioned.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions? I can't see any hands up. Only Councillor Busby's. If you'd like to lower yours.
Well, we've got Councillor Barrett, Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Just Stuart, I know the
camera.
Oh, sorry. Right. I know the flats are part of the affordable housing provision. And in the report, it talks about the design of the flats fully compliant with building regs.
Yes.
Does that include lifts?
They won't have a lift in them. In terms of, they meet every other aspect of the building regulations, including fire, which was mentioned previously as well. But they won't have a lift in them, no.
Because that would really enhance the provision for affordable for disabled people, wouldn't it? If they'd had lifts.
Yeah, it would do. It's not something we normally do as part of our offer, but if there was a requirement for disabled, that we could accommodate them in the ground floor level. So there's 2 flats at ground floor as well, so there's an opportunity there for the housing association who takes us on to accommodate them at the lower levels.
It seems a wasted opportunity when you're building not to incorporate a lift. I mean, I'm thinking of a development I know of in Cornard where they didn't put lifts in, and it limits the people who can go into the upper floor units. Elderly then don't have to be disabled to need a lift, or parents struggling with shopping and children. So it really seems to be a very short-sighted not to put a lift in.
Okay, I mean, it's not something we're proposing here, but I hear what you're saying, and I can take that away and speak to the powers to be, and maybe it's something we could consider in future developments.
Okay.
Good point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I can see no hands, so I'm going to move on. Thank you, Mr. McCann.
Thank you.
We'll go to the ward member now, and the ward member is Councillor Sue Carpendale. You, Sue, have 5 minutes to address the committee. I'll see if there's any questions afterwards. Hello to you.
Thank you, Chair. Start my stopwatch.
Good.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Just a few comments. I'm aware, and I want to acknowledge, that the applicants through Stuart McAdam have consulted and worked to improve their original design for this site, the outline approval for which they got 2 years ago. But you don't really need me to remind you that despite the improvements, locally this is a hugely unpopular decision because of the access to Little Tufts. Until this point, it was a small, quiet residential close, and this development, frankly, will impinge on all the other small, quiet developmental closes along Longfield Road as well. And you will also have noted that there are some concerns about potential vulnerability to localised flooding. So I'm not going to repeat all the concerns expressed elsewhere by the Parish Council and Mr. Child, but I do endorse them. Your February meeting deferred a decision on those on 3 grounds, and those are the ones that I will address. So on the plus side, you will have noted there are now 3 small bungalows for market sale and 4 affordable bungalows. Whether that's sufficient to meet local needs or your directive from February is obviously something that you will debate. There are also some improvements to footpaths, and I'm pleased to see the open space here and there, but again, are they sufficient? And I'm also pleased to see the 2 useful outside drying areas proposed to next to some of the affordable properties. So in terms of the housing mix, it's good to see 35 affordable properties, and 30 of them, including the bungalows, are 1- and 2-bedroom homes. On the downside, many of these are only allocated 1.5 parking spaces, which maybe assumes single adult occupancy, or maybe some neighbourhood battles in the morning and evening. There are only a handful of what I would call genuine visitor parking spaces on the rest of the site. And while the overall layout encourages parking behind the dwellings, and that's a feature that I like, I do think that the on-street parking is inevitable. Of the market homes, 24 of the 65 are 4-bedroom properties, so that's still quite a substantial number. 29 3-bedroom, 12, including 3 bungalows, are 2 bedrooms, so that's also good. So it is a better mix of sizes, even if it's still not ideal. I have, however, some grave reservations about the size of the rooms in many of these properties, whether they're large enough to function as bedrooms or as living space. And overall, the site remains cramped with a density greater than the rest of the village, and therefore it's out of keeping, especially for a development on this scale. I do have concerns that an estate of this nature might be distinctly different in character from the rest of the village, and not in a positive sense. The 3-storey height of the apartment block has not been reduced. I understand the arguments behind that, but again, it's out of keeping with the rest of the village. And I think whether we like that or not, it's a matter of context, assessment, individual judgment and aesthetics, and again, that's down to members to decide. I note what Stuart has said about building regulations, but I still have concerns about multi-storey, multi-occupancy buildings in the event of a fire or other accidents. Apart from the planning considerations, I do want to pick up Mr. Child's comments. I think his difficulty stems partly from the omission on the plans of an important detail concerning his property and the site boundary alongside 8 Pen Close, and that's the first one north of Little Tufts. The plans don't show that his property has both an extension and an outbuilding pretty much onto the boundary of his property, and both of those are missing from the drawings. Now, I'm aware that Stuart has very recently visited the household and spoken to Mr. Child, and they've come to this verbal agreement that's been referred to earlier today. That does include a 1.8 metre close boarded or something similar boundary fence located where the land registry records the boundary, not what's on these drawings. And there needs to be a facility to enable access to maintain the property. So that is something I think that they have talked about. And difficult to know how we can enshrine that in our permissions. Higher fence is important to this household, you know that, and it concerns the safeguarding and human rights of a disabled young adult. And I use the word safeguarding quite deliberately. In order to preserve the privacy and protection of this individual, documents supporting these concerns haven't been tabled for committee. But should committee be minded to approve these reserved matters today or at some future date, I would ask that perhaps when any conditions are being worded and framed, whilst not a specific planning point, could reference be made to the verbal agreement between the householder and Mr. McAdam, so that we're in no doubt about its importance? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure whether we can word that in a condition, but I'll find out whether a note can be added or what. Our legal advisor might be able to help us there. Ian, can you help out on that very last point before I go for questions?
Well, this is more a matter for the case officer to advise, but I don't know whether, and I don't think an informative is possible. Bradley might want to comment on that.
Yeah, because we've heard it from the applicant. Councillor Carpendale has reiterated it. I've commented on it. I would think we would take a very dim view if they didn't hold to their word. But case officer, can you just clarify this point? Could you add a note to it? Yep, Bradley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have considered that issue as well with regard to an agreement. I think it's important to emphasise that my recommendation to committee in terms of amenity impact wasn't predicated on such an agreement being reached. That's important to emphasise. That agreement is between the parties involved, is out with planning considerations as far as I'm concerned. Having said that, I fully acknowledge that some agreement has been reached, and I think that in terms of dealing with it or having that reflected in a planning permission, you could, or a condition could be framed around soft landscaping and hard landscaping, and in particular details in relation to the boundary that's in question, because I think that's the simplest way of dealing with it, in order that as part of an application submission, we would expect a particular detail to be submitted which deals with that particular issue. So I don't know if Ian's got anything to say on that, but that would be my way of approaching that particular thing.
So if we were minded to go down the road of approval, could you, while you're sitting there, write a sentence out that would incorporate that extra condition, which we, if we went down that road, we could add to it? I think that would satisfy. I personally, knowing Mr. Stuart McAdam, I would think he'd keep his word, but I do take your point. I do understand what Sue is saying.
I also respect what Miss Stuart's word, but he's not the man with the digger on the site.
Thank you. That's true.
Chair, just to point out that Mr. McAdam has raised his hand if you did want to quickly return to him.
I'm asking the legal advisor. He's shaking his head that I should.
No, it is appropriate, and this we can be sufficiently flexible. You can hear from him again. Yes, do so.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. McAdam. Would you like? You've heard the concerns from the local ward members, Councillor Carpendale. You've heard the planning officer. You've heard the legal side of it, and you've heard my comments on it. Would you now like to say what you want to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I am a man of my word. We have communicated with Mr. Child in email, so he has that email which went out yesterday or the day before. There is a condition on the outline application requiring submission of details to be agreed by the local authority. So if the council was minded to put an informative on relaying it back to that condition to give further consideration, I'm absolutely happy with that.
Thank you. Well, I think Mr. Bradley Heffer is busy writing a one sentence for us to add on. Okay. Is there any other questions to the ward member? No. Thank you very much. We'll move on. We'll open the debate then. And it's now over to you, members. Have anyone got any comments, views, or have you heard it all? Right, nothing from anybody. Okay, well, the fact that you're all silent, I intend to propose the officer's recommendation from the chair, plus an added condition, which the case officer will read out in a moment. So would you like to read that out for me, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in terms of the framing it within a standard condition that deals with hard landscaping, I would suggest the following sentence. In particular, details of the proposed boundary treatment to be provided at the boundary of the site with number 8 Pen Close are included within the submission.
Thank you very much. I'll add that as an extra condition. Do I have a seconder for my proposal so that we can proceed?
Yes, I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Councillor Osborne. Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Just don't.
Councillor Barrett.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Oh, right. Councillor Osborne, I see has come up. Yep. Okay, you're the seconder.
Yeah, I am. I very much like the alterations that have been carried out by Stuart McAdam for on this application. I think it's the revisions have been very, very good. I would just like to make comment that the SWIFT boxes to be agreed with the final deeds of the landscape be included in on those conditions, please. If you could make sure that's there.
I think they did say they were there, but I will check that out.
Well, they're not marked down. They would be included. So we just want to make sure.
Bradley, Officer Bradley Haffer, can you confirm that?
I think to allay the councillors' fears, Chair, what we could do is drag that out of the landscaping condition and have that as a completely separate condition. So that's completely clear then. Right. So it isn't lost. But I know that the intention isn't challenged by the applicant.
No. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll accept that, and you're second to that, Sir Osborne. Right.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I've got 2 hands up now. Councillor Barrett, followed by Councillor Busby. Adrian, you need to close down.
I don't know what's going on here. I didn't have my hand. I must have cancelled it.
Right. Okay.
I cancelled it and then inadvertently raised it.
Hinton has come up, so we'll take him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I wasn't very happy with this application when it first came up. Partly
the camera's not on.
Partly due to the access through Little Tufts. And certainly the response from Highways on that occasion, where they hadn't even been out to look at the site, was hardly encouraging. And certainly looking at the further comments that have been received from consultees, where you've got the NHS commissioning group saying they won't even be asking for any money. Well, if anybody's ever been to the branch of the Constable Country Medical Practice which serves Capel, they will know that it's a pokey little place with hardly any space in it. So to have another 300 people probably potentially descending on it could be a little bit problematic. The other thing I don't like are these turning circles at the end of cul-de-sacs, particularly where they impact upon neighbouring properties in the existing development of Capel St Mary, because they might have moved the houses away from the end of the development coming from outside of the site, but what makes more noise, a house or traffic turning in a confined space? The fact that they are also private roads, effectively, I find rather worrying, because in my own ward, there have been problems with private roads where the police, of course, can take no action whatsoever. So illegal parking up cars that are not registered or MOT'd or insured or anything else is completely out of their control. And I would like to see, if this application is going to be approved, that all roads are adopted so that they're all householders are treated in the same way in terms of their rights and access and protection under the law.
Thank you. Officer Bradley. No, you've got no comment, right?
Sorry, Chair. I was just trying to push the right buttons. I've clearly heard exactly what the councillors' concerns are. I think in relation to the issue of mitigation, Section 106 and SIL, all I can say is that issue was looked at the outline stage. We're not considering the impacts of that and mitigation of that now, unfortunately. It's purely down to the design and layout. They're the concerns that we're considering. In terms of the way the highways work, Clearly, the Highway Authority hasn't an objection, the functionality issue. The cul-de-sac, the movements with regard to vehicles, we appreciate that view, but again, I think in terms of the impacts in the round, the noise that may be generated by occasional car movements has to be quantified as a reason against not allowing something. And I think that when you judge the likely impacts of it, the position in relation to existing development, things like that, it wasn't felt that there was harm being created. I think allied to that, the element of soft and hard landscaping along the boundaries would help to ameliorate the impact of that somewhat, and that's something that, you know, would be conditioned. We can't actually, under planning, require all the roads to be adopted. That's something for the developer to take up with the Highway Authority. But as I say, as a planner, all I can say is that we're advised by the Highway Authority that the road layout that's proposed does work.
Thank you. Councillor Hinton, you wanted to come back?
Yes, to say that we are looking at all matters other than the point of access in this application. So the layout is of concern, and if we turn around and say, no, we don't like the layout, we're going to refuse it, they will have to go away and come up with something that's a little bit more sympathetic to the existing development of Capel St Mary. And if that includes adopting all the roads, then why not? We can say that all roads must be constructed to the same standard. I don't see why we have to have part of this estate adopted and part of it not adopted. Are they just adopting the piece that is going to take all the large agricultural equipment as it trundles through Little Tufts and out to the other end of the fields? Because that's basically what it seems to be. Then everybody else has to fend for themselves.
Bradley, did you want to come back on that? Or have you nothing more to add?
I'm
Because
not
the only
sure there's
alternative,
anything. Sorry, Chair.
The only alternative for Councillor Hinton would be to oppose the recommendation for approval. But Bradley, have you got anything you can add to help Councillor Hinton?
I'm not sure there's anything I can usually say more in relation to that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Busby?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I tend to share John's view on this. It seems to me that when we deal with persimmon applications, we have to fight to get a quality end result. We looked at the one in Hadley, went backwards and forwards between the planning officers and the applicant a number of times. We should only be interested in quality developments. We're not interested in quantity. And it seems the developers totally focused on quantity. Hence, we're going to give 100 houses regardless. I do wish they would consider the future impact of what these developments have on villages and the costs involved. Of people looking after roads. It could look a tip in about 5 to 10 years, depending on what kind of surface they use, and getting money out of affordable housing is going to be very difficult. I mean, there's something in the report again on page 44, 13.4. It's considered that the impacts of the development on the amenity of existing residents in the vicinity would not result in material detriment. So people living in Little Tufts have got to put up with 3 years of mud and dust whilst this is built out. I think that's quite a considerable detriment. It really is going to be a pain to live in that close.
Thank you.
The only other thing I'd say, a positive point, I hope, is that a drying area is only a drying area, providing people have got something to dry things on. So I would hope that they're going to put rotary dryers in. Otherwise, it's just a walled area.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Hinton, is your hand up again? No, you just haven't put them down. That's all it is. Right, then if there's no other comments, it's been proposed and seconded. I'm now going to ask the Chief Planning Officer to read out the proposal on the table before we go to the vote. So I think that is the, according to the papers, the recommendation by the officers plus the additional condition, which I'll just ask Bradley to reread to you all. Thank you. Bradley?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think that in relation to the tabled papers, the other thing you should be aware of is right at the end, I think. So unfortunately, I haven't got it up on my machine. But I think it identifies that there was double counting in relation to a couple of conditions that were imposed on the outline.
So you've rectified them.
We wouldn't need to reimpose them if planning permission were granted, just to make that clear. But I think in relation to the issue of number 8 Pen Close, the sentence I was suggesting is, in particular, details of the proposed boundary treatment to be provided at the boundary of the site with number 8 Pen Close shall be included. And that is within the context of an overall landscaping condition.
Thank you very much. So, members, we're voting on the approval following the submission on page 44, with none of them repeated unnecessarily, plus the additional condition that the case officer just read out. Right, I'm now going to ask the officer, Robert Carmichael, to do a roll call.
Thank you, Chair. If you could please respond with for, against or abstain. Councillor Suez?
Against.
Councillor Melanie Barrett?
For.
Councillor Peter Beer?
For.
Councillor David Busby?
Against.
Councillor Trevor Cresswell?
For.
Councillor John Hinton?
Against.
Councillor Lee Jamieson?
For.
Councillor Mary McLaren?
For.
Councillor Adrian Osborne?
For.
Councillor Lee Parker?
For.
And Councillor Stephen Plum?
For.
Thank you, Chair. I make that carried by 8 votes to 3. If I could check with Mr. Dupre.
Yes, indeed, I agree. That was 8 votes to 3. Resolution carried.
Thank you very much. Then that is approved by 8 votes to 3. Yep, that's right. Thank you very much, members. We're now more or less at the end. Our next meeting is due on the 29th of July. We'll be informed whether this is still going ahead in due course. All that leaves me to do now is to thank you all for your involvement today, and wish you a good afternoon. Thank you very much. Will you all turn your cameras off and your mics off?
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.